The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor of Ethan's home office. Hot liquid splashed across the divorce papers scattered on his mahogany desk, but the words were already burned into my memory. Irreconcilable. Differences. Division of assets. Petitioner seeks full custody of minor children. My husband of 12 years had been planning to leave me, and I discovered it by accident while looking for his passport for our supposed second honeymoon to Italy. Next month, I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind racing through the implications. Ethan thought he was being clever, filing first to gain the advantage. What he didn't know was that I'd been managing our family's finances for years while he played the role of successful tech CEO. Every account, every asset, every carefully planned investment strategy, I knew about them all. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony was delicious. While Ethan spent his evenings working late with his 28-year-old COO, Tessa Lang, yes, I'd known about that for months. I'd been quietly building our empire. The man who thought his wife was just a pretty face with a paralegal background had no idea that the portfolio he bragged about to his Silicon Valley buddies was actually my creation. I bent down to collect the papers, my hands surprisingly steady. The filing date was still 2 weeks away, giving me time to prepare. As I read through the documents, Ethan's strategy became clear. Claimed that his income as CEO of Wallace AI was the primary source of our wealth, minimize my contributions, and paint me as a dependent housewife who'd never worked a meaningful day in her life. The petition made me laugh, a cold, bitter sound in the empty office. Ethan was requesting sole custody of our daughters, Leela and Zoe, claiming I was emotionally unstable and unsuited for parenting responsibilities. He'd even included fabricated incidents, claiming I'd been drinking excessively and neglecting the children. It was a masterclass in legal manipulation, except for one crucial detail. He'd underestimated the woman he'd married. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. Love. The word felt hollow now, meaningless after what I'd discovered. But I typed back, of course, darling. I'll keep dinner warm for you. I needed to think, to plan. Moving to his leather chair, the one he'd bought to celebrate his latest funding round, I opened his laptop. Ethan had always been careless with passwords, using variations of our anniversary and his birthday. Within minutes, I was reviewing his recent activity. The evidence was worse than I'd imagined. Email chains with Tessa discussing their future together. Searches for bachelor apartments in Boston's Back Bay. And most damning of all, communications with a private investigator he'd hired to build a case against me. They'd been documenting my daily routine, photographing me at coffee shops, even following me to Leela and Zoe's school events, looking for any behavior that could be twisted to support his narrative of maternal unfitness. But Ethan had made a critical error. In his arrogance, he'd been sloppy. Every search, every email, every financial transaction was automatically backed up to our shared cloud storage, a system I'd set up years ago for security purposes. He'd been creating evidence against himself while thinking he was being clever. I pulled up our financial dashboard, a complex web of accounts I'd built over the years. Ethan saw only the surface level. Our joint checking account, his $401,000, our investment portfolio with Morgan Stanley. What he didn't see were the 18 offshore accounts, the shell companies I'd established, the cryptocurrency wallets, and the various trusts I'd created using my maiden name. The scale of our actual wealth would have shocked him. While Ethan bragged about our comfortable lifestyle, the reality was that we were worth over $47 million. Every bonus he'd received, every stock option, every inheritance from his grandmother had taken his money and multiplied it through careful investments and strategic planning. Now, looking at the divorce papers, I realized Ethan's plan was even more audacious than simple infidelity. He was planning to hide assets, claim our wealth was worth far less than reality, and leave me with a settlement that wouldn't even cover a year of private school for the girls. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I began documenting everything. Screenshots of his emails with Tessa, records of his searches for apartments, evidence of the private investigator, and most importantly, proof that every major financial decision in our marriage had been my strategy, my work, my success. The sound of the garage door opening sent me into action. I quickly cleared the laptop's history, repositioned the divorce papers exactly as I'd found them, and cleaned up the coffee spill. By the time Ethan walked through the front door, I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables with a smile on my face. "Smells incredible in here," he said, kissing my cheek with the same lips that had been lying to me for months. "You're amazing. You know that?" "Just taking care of my family," I replied, serving him a plate. "How was your day?" Ethan launched into his usual routine, complaining about difficult investors and office politics, never mentioning tests or divorce papers or private investigators. I nodded and smiled, playing the devoted wife, while my mind worked through the logistics of what needed to happen next. After dinner, as Ethan settled into his recliner to watch the Patriots game, I excused myself to check on the girls. Leela and Zoe were in the playroom, 12-year-old Leela helping 9-year-old Zoe with her math homework while they chatted about their day at Brookline Academy. Watching them, their innocent laughter, their trust that their world was secure, I felt a fierce protectiveness surge through me. Ethan could try to destroy me, but I would not let him use our daughters as weapons. I would not let him paint me as an unfit mother when I was the one who attended every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference while he was building the future of artificial intelligence. "Mom, are you okay?" Leela looked up at me with her father's intelligent brown eyes but my own intuitive nature. "You seem different tonight." I knelt down between them, brushing Leela's dark hair away from her face. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about how lucky I am to have you too." Zoe, ever the spirited one, grinned and threw her arms around my neck. "We're lucky to have you too, Mama. You're the best mom in the whole world. If only she knew how hard I was about to fight to stay that way." Later that night, after tucking the girls into bed and listening to Ethan's fake snores, he always faked sleep when he was plotting something, I retreated to my own office in the basement. This was my sanctuary, filled with legal texts from my paralegal days and financial journals where I tracked our investments. I pulled out my old contact list from Morrison and Associates, the family law firm where I'd worked before Leela was born. Most importantly, I found Julia Mercado's number. Julia had been my mentor, a brilliant attorney who'd taken me under her wing when I was just a 24-year-old paralegal fresh out of college. She'd taught me everything about family law strategy, about reading between the lines of legal documents, about protecting women who were being systematically destroyed by manipulative husbands. "If you ever need anything," she'd told me when I left to become a full-time mother, "call me, day or night." It was past midnight, but this couldn't wait. I dialed her number. "Sophia?" Julia's voice was alert despite the late hour. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "It's not. I need to see you tomorrow. Emergency." "What happened?" "Ethan's planning to divorce me and take my children away." "But Julia?" I stared at the divorce papers spread across my desk. "He has no idea what he's just awakened." The next morning, I dropped the girls at school as if nothing had changed. Leela gave me an extra long hug before getting out of the car. My perceptive daughter always sensed when something was wrong. Zoe bounced out with her usual energy, backpack flying, calling out reminders about her soccer practice that afternoon. "I'll be there," I promised, just as I always was. Julia's office was in downtown Boston, occupying 2 floors of a gleaming tower that housed some of the city's most prestigious law firms. As I rode the elevator to the 23rd floor, I remembered the last time I'd been here 12 years ago, when I was saying goodbye to my legal career to focus on raising Leela. "You're throwing away your potential," Julia had said. Then, "You have one of the sharpest legal minds I've ever worked with." "I'm not throwing it away," I'd replied. "I'm just pausing it." Now, walking through the familiar halls of Morrison and Associates, I realized I'd been preparing for this moment my entire marriage without knowing it. Julia's office was exactly as I remembered, floor-to-ceiling law books, awards covering one wall, and a massive window overlooking Boston Harbor. But Julia herself had changed. At 58, she was more formidable than ever, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her dark eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "Sophia Lynn," she said, standing to embrace me. "You look exactly the same. Marriage agrees with you." "Not anymore," I said, pulling the divorce papers from my purse. "He's planning to file these into weeks." Julia's expression darkened as she read through the documents. Her years of experience showed in the way she absorbed each detail, the subtle changes in her posture as she processed Ethan's strategy, This is sophisticated work, she said finally. Expensive. He's hired Blackstone, Patterson and Associates. I recognize the name, one of Boston's most ruthless firms, known for representing wealthy men in high-stakes divorces. They specialized in destroying wives who dared to fight back. The custody allegations are particularly vicious, Julia continued, her voice growing colder with each page. Claiming maternal unfitness, emotional instability, neglect of the children, and these supposed incidents. She looked up at me. Any truth to any of this? None. I've never had a drinking problem. I've never neglected my children. The worst thing I've done as a mother is occasionally let them have ice cream for breakfast on weekends. Then he's fabricating evidence to support a predetermined narrative. Julia set the papers down with the careful precision of someone handling a weapon. The question is, what's your counter strategy? This was why I'd called Julia. Not just because she was brilliant, but because she understood that the best defense was often a devastating offense. I want to file first, I said. Control the narrative before he can. That's smart. But filing first isn't enough against opponents like this. We need leverage. We need to know everything: his assets, his affairs, his vulnerabilities. We need to be 10 steps ahead. I reached into my purse and pulled out a flash drive. I've been documenting his activities for months. Financial records, email communications, evidence of infidelity with his COO, Tessa Lang. Julia's eyebrows rose. You've been investigating your own husband? I've been protecting my family's interests while he thought I was playing house. I leaned forward. Julia, there's something you need to understand. Ethan thinks he's the financial mastermind in our marriage, but every investment, every portfolio decision, every strategic financial move over the past 12 years, that was me. He doesn't even know the true extent of our wealth because I've been managing it through offshore accounts and trusts he's not aware of. How much are we talking about? $47 million. Maybe more. Julia was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. And he's trying to claim you're financially dependent? He has no idea what I'm capable of, but he's about to find out. Julia smiled, the predatory expression of a shark sensing blood in the water. Before we file anything, we need a complete picture of what we're dealing with. I'm going to refer you to someone who can help with that. She pulled out her phone and made a quick call. Jordan, it's Julia Mercado. I have a client who needs your particular expertise. Yes, it's that kind of case. Can you meet with her this afternoon? After hanging up, she turned back to me. Jordan Ackerman is the best private investigator in New England. Former Boston PD detective, specializes in high-asset divorce cases. If there are skeletons in Ethan's closet, Jordan will find them. What about the timeline? He's filing in 2 weeks. We'll be ready before then. But Sophia, you need to understand, once we start this process, there's no going back. He'll retaliate, probably viciously. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Leela's worried expression that morning, about Zoe's trusting smile, about all the times Ethan had dismissed my intelligence while benefiting from my financial strategies. Julia, I've been preparing for this fight my entire life. I just didn't know it until yesterday. She stood and extended her hand. Then let's go to war. As I left Julia's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the thrill of using my mind strategically, the satisfaction of being valued for my intelligence rather than my ability to make dinner reservations and coordinate carpool schedules. Ethan had awakened something in me that he was going to regret. I drove to my appointment with Jordan Ackerman, my mind already 3 moves ahead. By the time I picked up the girls from school that afternoon, I would have assembled the beginning of a legal dream team. Ethan thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. He was about to discover that I'd been playing chess all along. I'd just been letting him think he was winning. Jordan Ackerman's office was nothing like Julia's pristine legal environment. Located in a converted warehouse in Cambridge, it looked more like a tech startup than a private investigator's headquarters. Banks of computer monitors, surveillance equipment, and walls covered with photographs and case notes connected by red string like something out of a crime thriller. Jordan himself was not what I'd expected. In his early 40s, with graying temples and intelligent green eyes, he looked more like a college professor than a private detective. But there was something in his bearing, a watchfulness, a way of cataloging details that spoke to his law enforcement background. Julia tells me you're dealing with a sophisticated opponent, he said, gesturing for me to sit in a chair across from his cluttered desk. Tech CEO planning a preemptive divorce strike? Ethan Wallace, CEO of Wallace I confirmed. He's hired private investigators to build a case against me while planning to hide assets and manipulate custody arrangements. Jordan pulled up something on his computer. Wallace AI raised $40 million in Series B funding last year. Your husband's made quite a name for himself in the artificial intelligence space, built on financial strategies I developed, I said. But he's planning to claim I'm a dependent housewife who's never contributed to our wealth and the custody angle. He's fabricating evidence of maternal unfitness, claims I'm emotionally unstable and neglectful. I handed him the flash drive I'd prepared. I've documented his infidelity with his COO, his financial activities, and evidence that he's been having me surveilled. Jordan plugged in the drive and began scrolling through the files. His expression grew more interested with each document. This is excellent preliminary work, he said. You've got solid evidence of adultery and some questionable financial transfers. But if we're going to beat him at his own game, we need more. We need to know everything: where he goes, who he sees, what he's planning. What are you proposing? Comprehensive surveillance. I'll tail him, document his activities, and dig deeper into his digital footprint. But I should warn you, this gets expensive, and it gets complicated. Are you sure you want to go down this road? I thought about the divorce papers, about Ethan's lies, about my mental state, about his plan to take my daughters away from me. Mr. Ackerman, my husband thinks I'm a naive housewife who doesn't understand how the world works. He's about to discover that I understand it better than he does. Jordan smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him. In that case, let's get started. Over the next hour, Jordan outlined his surveillance plan. He would begin monitoring Ethan's movements immediately, focusing particularly on his meetings with Tessa Lang and any contact with his legal team. He would also conduct a deep dive into Wallace AI's financial records, looking for evidence of hidden assets or improper transfers. I'll also investigate the private investigator he hired to surveil you, Jordan added. Sometimes the watchers can be watched. As I drove home from Cambridge, my phone rang. It was my mother, Mira Lynn. Sophia, darling, how are you? You sounded strange when we talked yesterday. My mother had an uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong, even from 300 miles away in New York. The immigration from Taiwan had honed her instincts for survival and protecting her family. Mom, can you come visit for a few days? I could use some help with the girls, of course. Is everything all right with Ethan? I couldn't tell her everything, not yet. But I needed her here, needed the emotional support and the extra pair of eyes on Leela and Zoe while I navigated the coming battle. We're just going through a rough patch. I'll explain more when you get here. I'll take the train tomorrow morning. That evening, I began my own form of surveillance. While Ethan worked late or claimed to, I documented everything. I photographed the girls' homework that I helped them with, recorded videos of our bedtime routine, created logs of every school event I attended and every decision I made regarding their care. If Ethan wanted to paint me as an absent, unstable mother, I would present irrefutable evidence to the contrary. My phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. Initial surveillance complete. Your husband is definitely meeting with someone other than business associates. Sending photos. The images showed Ethan entering the Mandarin Oriental Hotel with Tessa Lang at 7:30 p.m., the same time he'd texted me that he was in a board meeting. They were holding hands, and in one particularly damning photo, Ethan was kissing her neck while she laughed. But it was the final image that made my blood run cold. Tessa's hand was resting on her stomach in a gesture that was either protective or performative. Was she pregnant, or was this part of their strategy to make Ethan look like a man starting a new family rather than a cheating husband? Another text from Jordan. Found something else. He's been transferring money to an account in the Cayman Islands. Looks like he's been planning this longer than you thought. I stared at the financial records he'd attached. Ethan had been systematically moving money offshore for the past 6 months, money I'd helped him earn through my investment strategies. Not only was he planning to leave me, but he was planning to do it with assets he was hiding from our divorce proceedings. The next morning, my mother arrived on the 8:15 train from New York. At 68, Mira Lynn was still a formidable woman, barely 5 feet tall, but with the presence of someone twice her size. She'd built a successful real estate business from nothing, raised 3 children, and never let anyone underestimate her because of her accent or her gender. You look tired, she said, studying my face as I hugged her at South Station. I haven't been sleeping well. Where's Ethan? Shouldn't he be here to greet his mother-in-law? He's busy with work. You know how it is. My mother's expression suggested she knew exactly how it was, and she didn't approve. Back at the house, I watched her interact with Leela and Zoe. They adored their grandmother, and she them. She helped Zoe with her science project, listened to Leela practice piano, and within hours had restored a sense of warmth and stability to our home that I hadn't realized was missing. That afternoon, while the girls were at their various activities and my mother was preparing dinner, I met with Julia again to review Jordan's initial findings. The offshore accounts are our smoking gun, Julia said, reviewing the financial records. He's committed actual fraud by hiding marital assets. This isn't just infidelity, it's criminal financial misconduct. How does this change our strategy? It gives us leverage we didn't have before. But Sophia, we need to be careful. Men like Ethan don't go down without a fight, and when they realize they're losing, they can become dangerous. Dangerous how? He'll escalate his attacks on your fitness. As a mother, he'll probably try to document you in compromising situations. And if he's desperate enough, Julia's expression darkened. Let's just say I've seen men do terrible things when their carefully constructed lives start falling apart. That evening, as I helped the girls with homework while my mother prepared her famous dumplings, I felt like I was living in two different worlds. In one, I was the devoted mother and daughter, creating warm family moments and maintaining the illusion of domestic happiness. In the other, I was a strategic operative gathering intelligence for a war that was about to explode into the open. Ethan came home at nearly 9 o'clock, his usual excuse about late meetings. He was charming with my mother, asking about her flight and complimenting her cooking. But I noticed the way his eyes darted around the house, taking inventory, looking for changes. How long are you staying, Mrs. Lynn? He asked over dinner. A few days, my mother replied. Sophia needs help with the girls. That's generous of you. But Sophia's perfectly capable of managing things on her own. There was something in his tone, a subtle criticism, a hint that perhaps I wasn't as capable as he was suggesting. My mother noticed it too. I could see it in the slight tightening around her eyes. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to bed, my mother and I sat in the kitchen drinking tea. That man doesn't appreciate you, she said quietly. What makes you say that? The way he talks to you. The way he talks about you. In Taiwan, we have a saying, a good husband makes his wife shine brighter. A bad one dims her light. I looked at my mother, this woman who had sacrificed everything to give her children better lives, who had built success through determination and intelligence, and realized she was giving me permission to fight back. Mom, I said carefully, what would you do if someone tried to take your children away from you? Her eyes flashed with something fierce and protective. I would become a tiger, and tigers don't ask permission to protect their cubs. My phone buzzed with another message from Jordan. Tomorrow surveillance shows a meeting between your husband, his lawyer, and someone from Child Protective Services. I think they're accelerating their timeline. I showed the message to my mother. She read it twice, then looked at me with the same expression she'd worn when she'd fought the immigration officers who tried to separate our family at the airport 30 years ago. Then we become tigers first, she said. I realized that Ethan had made a crucial miscalculation. He thought isolating me from my support system would make me vulnerable. Instead, he'd awaken not just my own protective instincts, but those of the strong women who had raised me to never back down from a fight. The next phase of our war was about to begin. To be continued. The Wallace AI Annual Gala was always the social event of Boston's tech scene, a glittering showcase of innovation, venture capital, and carefully curated networking. This year, it was being held at the Boston Harbor Hotel, and as Ethan's wife, I was expected to play my role, the supportive spouse who looked beautiful, made charming small talk, and never overshadowed her brilliant husband. What Ethan didn't know was that tonight, I was hunting. I spent extra time getting ready, choosing a midnight blue Diane von Furstenberg dress that was elegant but not flashy, expensive but not ostentatious. My goal was to blend into the background while observing everything, particularly the dynamics between Ethan and Tessa Lang. You look stunning, Ethan said as we rode in the Uber to the hotel. His hand rested on my thigh, a gesture that once would have made me feel cherished, but now felt performative. The investors are going to love meeting you. I'm looking forward to it, I replied, my voice warm and believable. It's been too long since I've gotten to see you in your element. The ballroom was magnificent, crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, and tables adorned with white orchids. The guest list read like a who's who of Boston's business elite: venture capitalists, tech entrepreneurs, university professors, and politicians. These were the people who moved millions with handshake deals and whose opinions could make or break a company. Ethan immediately launched into networking mode, introducing me to potential investors and board members. I played my part perfectly, the gracious wife who asked intelligent questions without appearing to compete with her husband's expertise. Sophia's the reason I'm able to focus on the big picture, Ethan told a group of investors from Kleiner Perkins. She handles all the day-to-day management so I can concentrate on innovation. Day-to-day management. That was how he characterized the financial strategies that had multiplied their initial funding into a $47 million empire. How wonderful, said Patricia Chen, a managing partner I recognized from Forbes articles. It's so important to have a strong support system. What's your background, Sophia? I worked in family law before the children were born, I said smoothly. But now my focus is on supporting Ethan's vision and raising our daughters. It was a carefully crafted response, humble enough not to threaten anyone, but specific enough to hint at capabilities beyond domestic management. Patricia's eyes sharpened slightly, recognizing something beneath the surface. Family law, she repeated. That must give you interesting insights into business partnerships. Before I could respond, Ethan's attention shifted across the room. Following his gaze, I saw her. Tessa Lang was everything the media described striking. Without being traditionally beautiful, with platinum blonde hair cut in a severe bob and the kind of confident bearing that commanded attention. She wore a red Carolina Herrera gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and she moved through the crowd like she owned it. Excuse me for just a moment, Ethan said to our group. I need to check on something with my COO. I watched him cross the room to Tessa, observe the way their body language changed when they were near each other. Nothing overtly romantic, they were too smart for that in such a public setting, but there was an intimacy in how she leaned and when he spoke, how his hand lingered on her lower back when he guided her to meet other guests. Your husband and Miss Lang make quite the team, Patricia observed, still standing beside me. They've built something remarkable together, I replied carefully. Indeed, though I always wonder about the long-term sustainability of such intensive partnerships. There was something in her tone that suggested she knew more than she was saying. I filed that information away for later consideration. 20 minutes later, I excused myself from the networking cluster and made my way toward the ladies' room. As I'd hoped, Tessa was there, touching up her lipstick in the gilded mirror. You must be Sophia, she said without turning around. I've heard so much about you. All good things, I hope? I replied, moving to the sink beside her. Oh, absolutely. Ethan talks about you constantly. How devoted you are to the children, how you've sacrificed your own career for the family. She capped her lipstick and turned to face me. It's so admirable, really. Not everyone could be so selfless. The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. Up close, Tessa was younger than I'd expected, probably 32 or 33. With the kind of polished confidence that came from never having to choose between ambition and motherhood. And, you've built such an impressive career, I said. COO at your age is remarkable. You must be very proud. I am. Though I have to admit, I'm looking forward to the next phase. Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, the same gesture Jordan had captured in his photographs. There's something to be said for having it all, don't you think? The implication was clear. She wasn't just planning to steal my husband. She was planning to replace me entirely as his business partner, his lover, and the mother of his children. Absolutely, I said, my voice steady. Though I've learned that having it all often means different things to different people. True. For instance, some people prioritize security and comfort. Others prefer growth and possibilities. She smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut glass. I suppose it depends on what stage of life you're in. Stage of life. As if I were some aging matron ready to be put out to pasture. You're right, I said, pulling out my own lipstick, a shade of red almost identical to hers. Though I've found that underestimating people based on their life stage can be a dangerous mistake. For the first time since the conversation began, uncertainty flickered across Tessa's face. She'd expected the dowdy housewife, the woman so ground down by domesticity, that she'd roll over without a fight. Instead, she was facing someone who spoke her language and wasn't intimidated by her implications. Well, she said, recovering quickly, I should get back. Ethan will be looking for me, of course. Don't let me keep you. As she reached the door, she turned back. By the way, Sophia, that's a beautiful dress. Very appropriate. After she left, I stared at myself in the mirror. Appropriate. The word was meant to diminish me, to suggest that I was playing it safe while she took risks. But looking at my reflection, I saw something different. I saw a woman who had been patient, strategic, and careful not because she lacked courage, but because she was planning something bigger than a dramatic confrontation in a hotel bathroom. When I returned to the ballroom, I found Ethan in conversation with Dr. Richard Holbrook, a renowned child psychologist who served on several nonprofit boards. Sophia, Ethan's voice was overly bright. Dr. Holbrook was just telling me about his work with families in transition. My skin prickled with recognition. This wasn't a casual conversation. This was Ethan building his case, establishing relationships with professionals who might later testify about child welfare and custody arrangements. How fascinating, I said, extending my hand to Dr. Holbrook. What kind of transitions do you typically work with? Divorce? Primarily. Helping children adjust to new family structures, assessing parental fitness in contested custody cases. His eyes studied me with professional interest. It's remarkable how much children pick up on, even when parents think they're protecting them from conflict. I imagine that's true, I replied. Children are much more perceptive than we give them credit for, indeed, which is why it's so important for parents to handle transitions with maturity and stability. Some mothers, unfortunately, struggle with that adjustment. The phrase was carefully chosen, designed to plant seeds about maternal instability without making direct accusations. I realized I was being interviewed, assessed, cataloged for future use. Absolutely, I said, my voice warm and reasonable. Though I've always found that the most stable thing for children is consistency, keeping the same routines, the same primary caregiver, the same home environment whenever possible. Dr. Holbrook nodded approvingly. Exactly. Maintaining the status quo is often the best approach, especially for the primary attachment figure. I caught Ethan's slight frown. He'd expected me to seem flustered, defensive, or to somehow reveal the instability he was planning to claim in court. Instead, I was presenting myself as the epitome of maternal stability while subtly establishing that I was the children's primary attachment figure. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Dr. Holbrook sharing insights about successful co-parenting and the importance of putting children's needs first. By the end, I could see him cataloging me as a thoughtful, engaged mother rather than the unstable woman Ethan needed him to see. It was lovely meeting you, Dr. Holbrook said as he prepared to leave. Your daughters are lucky to have such a thoughtful mother. After he walked away, Ethan's jaw was tight with frustration. You seem to really hit it off with Dr. Holbrook, he said. He's very insightful. I can see why his opinion would be valuable in family situations. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his face. He was beginning to realize that I wasn't the malleable housewife he'd been planning to discard. The rest of the evening passed in a carefully choreographed dance. I charmed investors, made intelligent conversation about artificial intelligence applications, and played the role of supportive wife while mentally cataloging every interaction, every potential witness, every piece of evidence that might be useful in the coming battle. As we rode home in another Uber, Ethan was unusually quiet. You were different tonight, he said finally. Different how? More engaged. It's been a while since I've seen you so comfortable in professional settings. Maybe I've just been missing it more than I realized. He studied my profile in the passing streetlights. Are you thinking about going back to work? It was a test. If I said yes, it would support his narrative that I was an absent mother more interested in career than children. If I said no, it would reinforce the image of financial dependence he was trying to establish. I think I'm exactly where I need to be, I said. For now. When we arrived home, my mother was reading in the living room, having stayed up to let us know the girls were safely asleep. How was the party? She asked. Educational, I replied, and meant it. Later, as I removed my makeup and changed into pajamas, I reflected on the evening. Tessa had shown her hand. She wasn't just planning to steal my husband. She was planning to erase me entirely. Ethan had revealed more of his strategy, introducing me to people who would later be called upon to assess my fitness as a mother. But I had accomplished something too. I had planted seeds of my own, establishing myself as the stable, consistent parent, the thoughtful mother, the woman who put her children's needs first. When Dr. Holbrook was eventually contacted for his opinion, he would remember a conversation with a reasonable, engaged mother, not the unstable woman Ethan would describe. My phone buzzed with a message from Jordan. Interesting evening. Got some good footage of your husband and Miss Lang. Also spotted the private investigator who's been tailing you. He was at the hotel tonight, photographing your interactions. I smiled grimly. Let them photograph me being charming, intelligent, and maternal. Every image they captured would undermine the narrative they were trying to build. Ethan's mistake was thinking that because I'd been quiet, I'd been weak. Tonight had proven something important, not just to him, but to myself. I wasn't just going to survive this war. I was going to win it. The next morning, while Ethan was at his usual workout, I met Julia at her office to finalize our strategy. The sun was just beginning to rise over Boston Harbor, casting golden light through her floor-to-ceiling windows. How did last night go? She asked, pouring coffee from an expensive-looking espresso machine. Enlightening. Ethan introduced me to Dr. Richard Holbrook, a child psychologist who specializes in custody evaluations. He's clearly building his case. And Tessa Lang? She made it clear that she's planning to replace me in every aspect of Ethan's life, including motherhood. Julia's expression darkened. Then we can't wait any longer. Jordan's surveillance has given us enough evidence to file a compelling case. If we move today, we can serve him before he has a chance to implement whatever he's planning. She spread the documents across her conference table. Our complaint, supporting affidavits, financial records showing Ethan's hidden assets, and Jordan's photographic evidence of the affair. This is comprehensive, I said, reviewing the filing. You've included everything. Not everything. I've left some evidence in reserve, strategic ammunition for when he inevitably tries to escalate. Julia's smile was predatory. Your husband thinks he's playing chess. He's about to discover that we've been playing a completely different game. The complaint was a masterpiece of legal strategy. It established me as the primary caregiver who had sacrificed her career for the family, documented Ethan's pattern of emotional absence and infidelity, and most importantly, revealed his attempts to hide marital assets through offshore transfers. The asset concealment is our nuclear option, Julia explained. It's not just grounds for an unfavorable division of property, it's potential criminal fraud. Judges don't look kindly on spouses who try to steal money during divorce proceedings. When do we file? This afternoon. I've already arranged for service of process. Julia checked her watch. According to his public schedule, Ethan will be giving a keynote presentation at the Innovation Summit at p.m. That's when we'll serve him. In public, sometimes the most effective legal strategy is also the most dramatic. When a tech CEO gets served divorce papers on stage in front of hundreds of industry leaders, it sends a very clear message about who's controlling this narrative. I felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with anticipation. This was the point of no return. Once we filed, there would be no pretending, no more careful performances at dinner parties. Are you sure about this? Julia asked, reading my expression. I thought about Tessa's smug implications about having it all, about Ethan's plans to paint me as an unfit mother, about my daughters potentially growing up believing their fathers lies about who I really was. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. That afternoon, I sat in the back of the Innovation Summit auditorium, wearing dark sunglasses and a simple black dress. Ethan was on stage delivering his presentation about the future of artificial intelligence in healthcare. He looked confident, commanding the visionary leader who was transforming an industry. The audience was captivated, hanging on his every word as he described algorithms that could predict medical crises before they occurred, AI systems that could revolutionize patient care. This was Ethan at his best, brilliant, charismatic, utterly convinced of his own importance. At exactly 2:23 p.m., as he was taking questions from the audience, a man in a gray suit walked purposefully down the center aisle. I recognized him as Marcus Webb, the process server. Julia had hired a former court officer with decades of experience and an unflappable demeanor. Ethan Wallace? Marcus's voice carried clearly through the auditorium's sound system. Ethan paused mid-sentence, his brow furrowing with confusion. Yes, you've been served. Marcus handed him the manila envelope containing our divorce complaint and walked away. The auditorium fell silent except for the soft whir of cameras. Tech journalists who had been covering the summit were now capturing something far more dramatic than a product announcement. I watched Ethan's face as he opened the envelope and scanned the first page. The color drained from his cheeks, his confident posture crumbled, and for a moment, he looked like exactly what he was, a man whose carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. This appears to be. He looked out at the audience, hundreds of his peers and potential investors, all watching his humiliation unfold. I'm going to need to. We'll have to. He couldn't finish the sentence. The great communicator, the visionary leader, the man who could convince venture capitalists to invest millions based on his charisma alone, was reduced to stammering fragments. Perhaps we should continue this presentation at another time, suggested the moderator, trying to salvage the situation, but the damage was done. Within minutes, videos of the serving would be circulating on social media. By evening, it would be covered in tech blogs and business publications. Ethan's image as the controlled, successful CEO had been shattered in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to his professional future. I slipped out of the auditorium before anyone could recognize me, my heart pounding with a mixture of satisfaction and terror. There was no going back now. My phone was already ringing as I reached my car. Julia. How did it look from inside? She asked. Devastating. He completely fell apart. Good. Now comes the hard part. He's going to retaliate, probably within hours. Are you ready? I thought about my daughters safely at school, unaware that their world was about to change forever. I thought about my mother, waiting at home with her quiet strength and unwavering support. I thought about the woman I used to be, the sharp paralegal who could dissect legal strategies and anticipate opposing counsel's moves. I'm ready. Then go home, pack what you need, and get to the safe house. It's time to disappear for a while. The safe house was a furnished townhouse in Cambridge that Julia had arranged through a client network, a place where women could stay and they needed to escape situations that were becoming dangerous. It wasn't luxurious, but it was secure. And most importantly, it was somewhere Ethan couldn't find us. I arrived home to find my mother already packing the girls' clothes, her movements efficient and purposeful. How did you know? I asked. I saw the news. Your husband is not a man who loses gracefully. She was right. Within an hour of the serving, Ethan had called 14 times, sent 17 text messages, and according to Jordan's surveillance, had driven by the house twice looking for my car. When the girls came home from school, I sat them down in the living room for one of the hardest conversations of my life. Daddy and I are having some grown-up problems. I began carefully. We're going to be staying with Grandma Mira at a different house for a while. Leela, perceptive as always, studied my face with concern. Are you getting divorced? There was no point in lying. The news coverage would make it impossible to hide. And children deserved honesty even when the truth was painful. Yes, sweetheart, we are. Zoe's eyes filled with tears. Is it because of something we did? No, baby. This has nothing to do with you or anything you've done. Sometimes adults make decisions that aren't about their children at all. This is one of those times. Will we still live with you? Leela asked. Yes, you'll always live with me. That's never going to change. What about Daddy? Telling and preparing. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Daddy loves you very much, and you'll still see him. But we won't all be living in the same house anymore. It took 2 hours to pack what we needed, and another hour to explain to the girls why we couldn't take all their toys, why they couldn't say goodbye to their friends, why everything was happening so fast. As we drove away from the house I'd called home for 12 years, I felt a mixture of grief and liberation. That house held memories of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, of Leela's first steps and Zoe's bedtime stories. But it also held the weight of years of feeling diminished, of having my contributions minimized, of slowly disappearing into someone else's idea of who I should be. The townhouse in Cambridge was smaller but brighter, with large windows and a garden where the girls could play. My mother immediately began making it feel like home and packing groceries, arranging flowers, creating the kind of warm domestic atmosphere that made any space feel safe. That evening, as I tucked the girls into their temporary beds, Leela grabbed my hand. Mommy, are you scared? I considered lying, giving her the reassuring platitude that adults often offered children. Instead, I decided on truth. Yes, sweetheart, I am scared. But do you know what? What? Being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is something that scares you, if it's the right thing to do. Is this the right thing to do? I thought about the divorce papers I'd found, about Ethan's plan to take them away from me, about the kind of woman I wanted them to see when they looked at their mother. Yes, this is the right thing to do. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, I sat on the small patio with my mother, drinking tea, and watching the lights of Cambridge twinkle in the distance. Your father would be proud, she said quietly. Even though I'm breaking up our family? You're not breaking up anything. You're protecting what matters most. She reached over and squeezed my hand. That man broke your family the moment he decided. You weren't worth fighting for. You're just making sure he doesn't get to write the ending. My phone buzzed with updates from Julia and Jordan. Ethan had hired a crisis management firm to control the media narrative. He'd called an emergency board meeting to address the publicity, and he'd already reached out to Dr. Holbrook about expediting a custody evaluation. But there was other news too. Judge Eleanor Rivera had been assigned to our case, a Latina judge known for her sharp mind and her intolerance for manipulation tactics. Several tech journalists had reached out to Julia's office, wanting to hear the wife's side of the story. And most importantly, Patricia Chen from Kleiner Perkins had called Julia directly, offering to provide character references if needed. She said she could tell there was more to you than met the eye, Julia had reported. Apparently your conversation at the gala made quite an impression. As I prepared for bed in this strange new space, I realized that everything had changed in the span of a single day. This morning I had been Ethan Wallace's wife, living in his house, dependent on his reputation and goodwill. Tonight, I was Sophia Lynn, a woman with her own legal team, her own strategy, and her own power. The war had officially begun. The first salvo came at the next morning, delivered not by lawyers or court filings, but by the Boston Globe. Tech CEO's wife battles mental health struggles, screamed the headline on page 3, accompanied by a photo of me from 3 years ago looking haggard after a bout with postpartum depression following a miscarriage I'd suffered between Leela and Zoe. I stared at the article over my morning coffee, my mother reading over my shoulder as the girls ate breakfast in the next room. The piece was masterfully crafted. It never directly accused me of being unstable, but it painted a picture of a woman who had struggled with the pressures of marriage to a high-profile tech executive and had sought professional help for emotional difficulties. How did they get this information? My mother asked, her voice tight with anger. Medical records, I said, my mind already working through the implications. Ethan must have access to our insurance records, or he's found another way to obtain confidential information. The article included quotes from unnamed sources describing me as increasingly isolated and overwhelmed by family responsibilities. It mentioned my withdrawal from social activities and suggested that the stress of being married to such a successful man had taken its toll on my mental health. What made it particularly insidious was that none of it was technically false. I had sought therapy after the miscarriage. I had withdrawn from some social activities, preferring to focus on my daughters rather than the endless cycle of tech industry events. I had sometimes felt overwhelmed by the responsibilities of managing a household while Ethan traveled constantly for business, but the article stripped away all context, all nuance, and presented these normal human experiences as evidence of fundamental instability. My phone rang. Julia, have you seen the Globe? Reading it now. This is exactly what we expected. He's trying to establish the narrative before we can counter it. But Sophia, this actually helps us. How? Because he's shown his hand. He's revealed that he has access to confidential medical information and that he's willing to leak it to the press. That's going to backfire spectacularly when we get in front of Judge Rivera. An hour later, I was sitting in a radio studio in downtown Boston, across from Rebecca Martinez, host of Morning Conversations, a popular NPR-affiliated talk show that focused on women's issues and social justice. Julia had arranged the interview with strategic precision. Rather than having me respond defensively to Ethan's narrative, we were going to establish our own one that focused on empowerment, motherhood, and the challenges facing women who dared to fight back against powerful men. We're here with Sophia Lynn, whose divorce from tech CEO Ethan Wallace has been making headlines, Rebecca began. Sophia, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me, Rebecca. The Boston Globe article this morning painted a picture of Someone struggling with mental health challenges. How do you respond to that characterization? I had practiced this answer with Julia, but sitting in front of the microphone, I realized I didn't need to perform. I just needed to tell the truth. Rebecca, I think any woman who has experienced pregnancy loss, who has raised children while managing a household, who has supported a spouse's demanding career while sometimes feeling lost in her own identity, I think those women will recognize my story. Seeking help when you need it isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. You mentioned supporting your spouse's career. Can you tell us about that? I gave up my own career in law to focus on our family. I managed our finances, our investments, our household, essentially everything that allowed Ethan to focus on building his company. I don't regret that choice, but I do think it's important for people to understand that behind many successful men are women whose contributions often go unrecognized, and now you're fighting for custody of your daughters. What's that process like? It's terrifying, honestly. The idea that someone could try to paint you as an unfit mother, could try to take your children away using resources and legal strategies you can't match, it's every mother's worst nightmare. But I have something Ethan didn't count on. What's that? I have the truth. And I have 12 years of documentation showing who has been the primary caregiver, who has been present for every school event and doctor's appointment, who has prioritized our children's well-being above everything else. The interview continued for 20 minutes, with Rebecca asking thoughtful questions about the challenges of divorce, the weaponization of mental health struggles, and the resources available to women in similar situations. By the end, I had established myself not as a victim, but as an advocate, someone fighting not just for her own children, but for all women facing similar battles. When I left the studio, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pride in my own voice. But Ethan's response was swift and brutal. That afternoon, Jordan called with disturbing news. He's escalated beyond legal tactics. I caught his PI photographing the girls' school, trying to document any evidence of disruption or instability in their routine. He's using our children as pawns. It gets worse. I also intercepted communications suggesting he's planning to file for emergency custody, claiming you've kidnapped the children by moving them to the safe house. Emergency custody. The words sent ice through my veins. If successful, such a motion could result in the girls being removed from my care immediately, pending a full hearing. Julia's response was characteristically fierce. Let him try. We have documentation showing that we notified his attorney of our temporary address within hours of moving. We have evidence that the children are attending their regular school, maintaining their normal routine. Most importantly, we have his pattern of manipulation and asset concealment. But that evening brought another challenge. As I was helping Zoe with her homework, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Brookline Academy. Mrs. Wallace, this is Principal Carter. I wanted to let you know that some parents have been asking questions about the situation with your family. There was an incident today where another child made some unkind comments to Leela about the divorce. My heart broke for my 12-year-old daughter, who was already dealing with her parents' separation and now had to face cruel comments from classmates. What exactly was said? I'd rather not repeat the specific words, but it seemed the other child had heard things from their parents about your circumstances. Other parents, of course. Ethan's media strategy wasn't just about public perception, it was about poisoning our social community, making our lives untenable in the places where we'd built our support systems. When I hung up, I found Leela sitting on her bed, staring out the window. Sweetheart, Principal Carter called. Do you want to talk about what happened today? Leela's eyes filled with tears. Madison Chen said her mom told her that you're crazy and that daddy's going to take us away because you can't take care of us anymore. Madison Chen, Patricia Chen's daughter, the same Patricia Chen who had offered to provide character references. Either she was playing both sides, or the rumor mill was operating independently of facts. I sat down beside Leela and pulled her into my arms. Listen to me very carefully. People sometimes say things when they don't understand a situation. Adults can be just as mean as children sometimes, and unfortunately, children often repeat what they hear at home. But is it true? Are you sick? Is Daddy going to take us away? I am not sick. I am not crazy. I am your mother, and I love you more than anything in this world. No one is going to take you away from me. But what if they try? I looked at my daughter, this intelligent, sensitive girl who was being forced to grow up too fast because of her father's manipulation, and made a decision. then I will fight them with everything I have. And do you know why? Why? Because you and Zoe are worth fighting for. Because being your mother is the most important thing I've ever done or will ever do. And because sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. That night, after both girls were asleep, I sat with my mother and Julia in the townhouse's small living room, planning our counteroffensive. The emergency custody motion will be filed tomorrow, Julia predicted. He's going to claim that moving the children was evidence of instability, that the media attention is harmful to them, and that you're using them as pawns in the divorce. All things he's actually doing. Exactly. Which is why we're going to be ready with our own evidence. Jordan has been documenting the children's adjustment to the temporary move. They're thriving, maintaining their routine, showing no signs of distress. We have their teachers' statements affirming their emotional stability. We have evidence that you've been protecting them from media attention while he's been feeding stories to reporters. What about the medical records leak? Julia's smile was sharp. That's going to be his undoing. Leaking confidential medical information isn't just unethical, it's potentially criminal. Judge Rivera is going to be very interested in how that information found its way to the Boston Globe. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on how much had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, I had been living a lie, pretending that my marriage was solid while my husband planned my destruction. Tonight, I was living in a temporary home, fighting for my children, and discovering reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed. The war of narratives was far from over. Ethan would continue to escalate, continue to try to paint me as unstable and unfit. But I had something he didn't understand: the truth, and the determination to fight for it. More importantly, I was no longer fighting alone. I had Julia's legal expertise, Jordan's investigative skills, my mother's unwavering support, and something else: a growing network of women who recognized my story as their own, who saw in my fight a reflection of their own struggles against systems designed to diminish them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attacks, new attempts to break my resolve. But tonight, I went to sleep knowing that I was exactly where I needed to be, in the fight of my life, for the people who mattered most. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for a.m. on a gray Thursday morning in Suffolk County Family Court. I arrived early with Julia, carrying a leather briefcase that contained what we hoped would be the ammunition to destroy Ethan's claims once and for all. Judge Eleanor Rivera's courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that gave everything a harsh, institutional feel. But Judge Rivera herself commanded the space, a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back severely and dark eyes that seemed to see through every pretense. "Good morning, Your Honor," Julia said as we approached the counsel table. Julia Mercado representing Sophia Lynn. Across the aisle, Ethan sat with his legal team from Blackstone, Patterson and Associates. Lead counsel was Margaret Blackstone herself, a woman with a reputation for destroying opposing parties with surgical precision. Ethan looked composed, confident, wearing his best suit and the expression of righteous concern he'd perfected for board meetings. "Your Honor," Margaret began, "we're here today because Mr. Wallace is deeply concerned about the welfare of his minor children. Since Mrs. Wallace filed her divorce complaint, she has removed the children from their family home without adequate notice, exposed them to media attention, and demonstrated a pattern of erratic behavior that puts the children's emotional and psychological well-being at risk." Judge Rivera's expression remained neutral as she reviewed the emergency motion. "Miss Mercado, your response?" Julia stood with the confidence of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire career. "Your Honor, this emergency motion is nothing more than a desperate attempt by Mr. Wallace to deflect attention from his own misconduct. Mrs. Lynn moved herself and the children to temporary housing after discovering evidence of her husband's affair, his plans to hide marital assets, and his systematic campaign to paint her as an unfit mother. These are serious allegations," Judge Rivera said. "Let's start with the immediate issue: the children's current living situation. Mr. Wallace, you claim Mrs. Lynn has essentially kidnapped your children?" Ethan stood, his voice taking on the earnest tone he used with investors. "Your Honor, I came home Tuesday evening to find the house empty. No note, no explanation. My wife had taken our daughters without any discussion or agreement about their care." Mrs. Lynn, your response? I had practiced this moment with Julia, but sitting in the witness chair, facing the judge who would determine my children's future, my preparation felt inadequate. Then I thought about Leela's tears, about Zoe's confused questions, about the divorce papers that had started this nightmare. Your Honor, I moved my daughters to a safe location after discovering that my husband had hired private investigators to surveil our family and had been planning our divorce for months without my knowledge. I notified his attorney of our location within 2 hours of moving, and the children have maintained their normal school schedule and routine. You discovered he was planning divorce proceedings? Yes, Your Honor. I found and signed divorce papers in his briefcase that contained false allegations about my mental state and fitness as a mother. These papers were dated for filing 2 weeks in the future, suggesting this was a planned ambush. Margaret Blackstone stood quickly. Objection. Your Honor, Mrs. Wallace's alleged discovery of draft legal documents is hearsay and lacks foundation. I'll allow it for now, Judge Rivera said. Miss Mercado, I assume you have evidence to support these claims? Julia approached the bench with a thick folder. Your Honor, we have photographic evidence of the divorce papers Mrs. Lynn discovered, metadata showing when they were created, and financial records demonstrating Mr. Wallace's attempts to conceal marital assets. I watched Ethan's face as Julia presented the evidence. For the first time since the hearing began, his confident expression faltered. Furthermore, Julia continued, we have evidence that Mr. Wallace has been conducting surveillance of his own family and leaking confidential medical information to the press. Judge Rivera's eyebrows rose. Medical information? Yes, Your Honor. This morning's Boston Globe article contained details from Mrs. Lynn's therapy sessions following a pregnancy lost 3 years ago. We believe Mr. Wallace provided this confidential information as part of a media campaign to undermine his wife's credibility. Margaret Blackstone was on her feet again. Your Honor, Mr. Wallace categorically denies any involvement in media leaks. Furthermore, this is a custody hearing, not a trial on alleged HIPAA violations. Actually, Miss Blackstone, Judge Rivera's voice carried a warning edge. This is exactly the type of behavior that's relevant to custody determinations. Parents who weaponize their children's other parent by leaking confidential information demonstrate a concerning disregard for the family's well-being. Julia pressed her advantage. Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence of the children's adjustment since the temporary move. Over the next hour, we presented a comprehensive picture of my daughter's lives. Julia called Miss Peterson, Leela's teacher, who testified via video conference that Leela had shown no signs of distress and had actually seemed more relaxed in recent days. Zoe's soccer coach provided a written statement confirming that she had attended all practices and games, demonstrating normal energy and focus. Most powerfully, we presented video evidence I had been collecting for months, daily footage of my interactions with the girls, homework sessions, bedtime routines, the countless small moments that proved I was their primary caregiver. Your Honor, Julia said as she played a video of me helping Zoe with a science project. These recordings demonstrate that Mrs. Lynn has been the consistent, engaged parent throughout the marriage. While Mr. Wallace was traveling for business or working late hours, Mrs. Lynn was present for every aspect of their children's lives. Margaret Blackstone tried to counter with evidence of my instability, the therapy sessions, my withdrawal from social events, my sudden decision to file for divorce. But each point she raised, Julia deflected with context and counter evidence. Mrs. Lynn sought therapy after pregnancy loss, a normal, healthy response to trauma. She reduced social obligations to focus on her children's needs, and her decision to file for divorce was hardly sudden. It was a strategic response to discovering her husband's deception. The turning point came when Judge Rivera asked to speak with the children. Your Honor, Margaret protested, the children are minors who shouldn't be subjected to the stress of court proceedings. Miss Blackstone, I've been presiding over family court for 15 years. I'm perfectly capable of speaking with children in an age-appropriate manner. Judge Rivera's tone brooked no argument. I'll see them in my chambers individually and briefly. An hour later, after speaking with both Leela and Zoe, Judge Rivera returned to the bench. Her expression was unreadable, but I caught something in her eyes that looked like approval. I've heard enough, she said. Mr. Wallace, your emergency motion is denied. Ethan's face went white. Margaret Blackstone looked stunned. Furthermore, Judge Rivera continued, I'm concerned about the pattern of behavior described here today. Mr. Wallace, If I find evidence that you've been leaking confidential information to the media or using surveillance against your family inappropriately, I will consider sanctions up to and including restricted custody. Your Honor, Margaret began. I'm not finished, Miss Blackstone. Mrs. Lynn, your temporary custody arrangement will continue pending our full hearing. However, I'm ordering supervised visitation for Mr. Wallace 2 hours every Saturday at the Family Services Center. Supervised visitation. I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. Ethan, who had been so confident about gaining full custody, was now being treated like a potentially dangerous parent. Finally, Judge Rivera said, I'm ordering a full forensic financial investigation of the marital estate. If there are hidden assets, we're going to find them. As we left the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in months. Ethan brushed past us without making eye contact. His legal team clustered around him like bodyguards protecting a wounded politician. How did I do? I asked Julia as we walked to her car. You were perfect, calm, credible, maternal without being defensive. And Judge Rivera clearly saw through his manipulations. What happens next? Now we prepare for the main event. The full custody and asset hearing is scheduled for next month. Ethan's going to come back harder, more desperate. But today showed us something important. What's that? Truth has power. When you stopped hiding, stopped playing small, stopped letting him define you, you became formidable. That afternoon, I picked up the girls from school myself for the first time in a week. As we drove back to the townhouse, Leela asked about the hearing. Did you win, Mom? It's not about winning or losing, sweetheart. It's about making sure you and Zoe are safe and loved. But we get to stay with you? Yes, you get to stay with me. In the rearview mirror, I caught Zoe's grin. Good. I like our new house. It has better cookies. My mother had indeed been baking. Constantly her way of creating comfort in uncertain times. That evening, as I tucked the girls into bed, I reflected on how much had changed since I'd found those divorce papers in Ethan's briefcase. I had discovered reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed, rebuilt relationships with people who valued my intelligence, and most importantly, proven to myself that I was capable of fighting for what mattered most. But I also knew this was just the beginning. Ethan's emergency motion had failed, but a desperate man with unlimited resources could still cause tremendous damage. The real battle was yet to come. As I turned off the lights in their temporary bedroom, Leela called out, softly, Mom, I'm proud of you. Why is that, sweetheart? Because you're brave. Even when you're scared, you're still brave. Later that night, I sat on the small patio with my mother, sharing tea and watching the Cambridge skyline. Your father would have loved today, she said quietly. He would have hated that it was necessary, perhaps, but he would have been proud of how you handled it. She reached over and squeezed my hand. You found your roar today. My phone buzzed with a message from Jordan. Interesting development. Ethan just fired his private investigator and hired a new security firm. Also, Tessa Lang was photographed leaving his apartment building this morning looking upset. Trouble in paradise? I smiled grimly. Let him escalate. Let him bring in new investigators, new lawyers, new strategies. I was no longer the woman who could be intimidated by his resources or his reputation. I was Sophia Lynn, mother, strategist, and fighter. And I was just getting started. 3 weeks after the emergency custody hearing, I thought I understood the scope of Ethan's deception. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was helping Zoe with her science project on the solar system. My phone rang with Jordan Ackerman's number, and something in his tone when he said Sophia made me set down the papier McMars we'd been painting. You need to sit down for this, he said, and you need to call Julia. What I've found changes everything. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Julia's conference room while Jordan spread documents across the mahogany table like a detective laying out evidence at a crime scene. His laptop was open to multiple browser windows, each displaying financial records, bank statements, and corporate filings that painted a picture of systematic fraud. Remember how we found evidence of Ethan moving money to offshore accounts? Jordan began, his excitement barely contained. Well, I've been following those digital breadcrumbs and they lead somewhere very interesting. He pulled up a series of wire transfer records. Over the past 8 months, Ethan has systematically moved $3.2 million of marital assets, money that legally belongs to both of you, into accounts controlled by Tessa Lang. Julia leaned forward, her predatory instincts sharpening. How much? Did you say? 3.2 million. But here's where it gets beautiful from a legal perspective. He's been routing these transfers through Wallace AI's business accounts, disguising them as consulting fees, marketing expenses, and strategic partnerships. That's not just asset concealment, Julia said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had just found the perfect weapon. That's corporate fraud, tax evasion, and if Wallace AI has outside investors, securities fraud. Jordan finished. I've been tracking the paper trail all night. Ethan's been stealing from his own company to fund his affair and prepare for divorce proceedings. He turned his laptop screen toward us. Look at this timeline. The transfers to Tessa started exactly 2 weeks after he first met with divorce attorneys. He's been planning this systematically for almost a year. I stared at the financial records, feeling a cold satisfaction wash over me. Every transfer, every disguised payment, every fraudulent business expense was documented with corporate precision. Ethan's arrogance had been his downfall. He'd kept meticulous records of his own crimes. There's more, Jordan continued, clearly enjoying this moment. I've also been monitoring Tessa's activities since our custody hearing. Remember how she implied she was pregnant at the gala? He slid a series of photographs across the table. They showed Tessa at various locations over the past 2 weeks: a wine tasting in Back Bay, a charity run in Cambridge, a business dinner at Legal Seafoods. In every image, she was clearly not pregnant despite having suggested otherwise just a month earlier. The pregnancy was staged, I said, understanding immediately. Fake belly, fake symptoms, fake everything. It was all designed to make Ethan look like a man starting a new family rather than someone abandoning his current one. Jordan's expression darkened. But the most interesting photo is this one. The final image showed Tessa leaving a medical building in downtown Boston. The timestamp showed it was taken just 3 days ago. I did some digging. That's Dr. Catherine Holbrook's office, a fertility specialist. But here's the thing, Tessa wasn't there for fertility treatments. She was there for something else entirely. Julia's eyebrows rose. What kind of something else? According to my source at the clinic, she was inquiring about procedures that could simulate pregnancy symptoms. Apparently, she wanted to know how long certain medications could maintain the appearance of early pregnancy. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Tessa hadn't just been faking a pregnancy for public appearances, she'd been medically simulating one to manipulate Ethan's decisions about the divorce timing and strategy. How long have they been planning this? I asked. Jordan pulled up another document, email communications he'd managed to intercept. Look at this exchange from 6 months ago. The emails were between Ethan and Tessa, with subject lines that made my stomach turn: timeline acceleration, asset protection strategy, and most chilling of all, managing the Sophia problem. I read one of Tessa's messages aloud. We need to move faster on the financial transfers. Your wife is smarter than you give her credit for, and if she starts asking questions about the business accounts, we could lose our advantage. The pregnancy storyline will give us emotional leverage, but we need the money moved before she can trace it. She was right to be worried, Julia said grimly, but she underestimated how thorough Jordan's investigation would be. Jordan opened another file. That's not even the worst part. Look at this communication from last week. The email was sent the day after our emergency custody hearing, when Judge Rivera had denied Ethan's motion and ordered supervised visitation. The custody strategy failed completely, Tessa had written. Judge Rivera clearly doesn't buy the narrative about Sophia being unstable. We need to implement Plan B immediately. I've already contacted our associates about the alternative approach we discussed. Plan B? I felt ice in my veins. What's Plan B? Jordan's expression was grim. I'm still working on that, but based on other communications I've intercepted, it involves escalating beyond legal tactics. They're discussing private investigators with law enforcement backgrounds, surveillance that goes beyond what they've already done, and something about creating incidents that establish a pattern. Julia stood abruptly and began pacing. They're planning to manufacture evidence, set up situations where they can photograph or document behavior that supports their narrative about your unfitness. Can they do that legally? Legally? No, but desperate people don't always worry about legality. Julia stopped pacing and fixed me with a serious look. Sophia, this changes our timeline completely. We can't wait for the scheduled hearing next month. We need to file amended complaints immediately and request emergency sanctions. Over the next hour, we developed what Julia called our nuclear option strategy. The evidence Jordan had gathered wasn't just grounds for favorable divorce settlement, it was the foundation for criminal referrals that could send Ethan to federal prison. The corporate fraud alone carries a 5 to 10-year sentence, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic accountant Julia had called to review the financial evidence. When you add in the tax evasion from disguising personal transfers as business expenses, plus potential securities violations, if Wallace AI has outside investors, he's looking at serious federal time. Julia finished. What does this mean for our case? I asked. It means we hold all the cards now, Julia said with fierce satisfaction. Family court judges don't look kindly on spouses who commit federal crimes during divorce proceedings. It tends to influence their decisions about custody and asset division. More importantly, added Marcus Webb, the white-collar crime specialist Julia had brought in, it means Ethan's about to face consequences that go far beyond divorce court. When federal prosecutors start investigating corporate fraud, they tend to find other irregularities. His entire business empire could collapse. That evening, I returned to the Cambridge townhouse with a mixture of vindication and apprehension. We had found the smoking gun that could destroy Ethan's case, but I knew he wouldn't surrender without a fight. My mother was waiting in the living room with an expression I recognized from childhood, the same look she'd worn when dealing with immigration officials who underestimated her intelligence and determination. How did the meeting go? She asked. Though her tone suggested she already knew, the answer was significant. We found evidence that could end this war in our favor, I said, sitting beside her on the couch. Ethan's been committing federal crimes to fund his affair and hide money from the divorce. Good, she said with quiet satisfaction. A man who steals from his own family deserves whatever consequences follow. Mom, there's something else. We think he might be planning to escalate beyond legal tactics. Jordan intercepted communications about Plan B and manufacturing evidence. Her expression hardened. What kind of evidence? We're not sure yet, but they mentioned creating incidents that would establish a pattern of instability or unfitness. My mother was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the strategic mind that had built a successful business from nothing. Sophia, she said finally, do you remember what I told you about tigers? That good mothers become tigers when protecting their cubs. Tigers don't just have claws, darling. They have patience. They wait for the perfect moment to strike. She reached over and squeezed my hand. You've been patient long enough. It's time to use your claws. The next morning brought both validation and new concerns. Julia called at 7 a.m. with updates. That would reshape our entire strategy. Judge Rivera expedited our hearing, she said without preamble. She wants to see all parties in her chambers this afternoon to address the new evidence. That's good news, right? Very good news. But Sophia, there's something else you need to know. Margaret Blackstone withdrew as Ethan's counsel last night. I sat up straighter in bed. Why would she do that? Ethical conflict. When attorneys discover their clients have been lying about criminal activity, they have a professional obligation to withdraw representation. It means even Ethan's own legal team doesn't want to be associated with what we've uncovered. So he's without representation. He'll find someone, but any competent attorney will tell him the same thing. He needs to focus on damage control, not offensive legal strategy. 2 hours later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, Ethan's voice came through, strained and desperate in a way I'd never heard before. Sophia, we need to talk. Through our attorneys, Ethan. That's how this works now. No, you don't understand. This has gotten completely out of hand. We can work something out. Just the two of us. For the girl's sake. For the girl's sake. Even now, facing potential federal charges, he was trying to manipulate me using our daughters. The time for working things out was before you hired private investigators to build a false case against me, I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. Before you stole millions from our marriage to fund your affair. Before you and your mistress planned to manufacture evidence of my unfitness as a mother. There was silence on the other end, then something that sounded like a sob. Sophia, I never meant for it to go this far. Tessa, she convinced me that you were planning to take everything, that you were going to destroy me financially and turn the girls against me. I was planning to continue being your wife and raising our children. You were the one planning destruction. Please, his voice broke completely. If this goes to court today, if Judge Rivera sees what you found, I could go to prison. Wallace, AI could be dissolved. The girls could lose their college funds, their inheritance, everything. For a moment, just a moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy. This was the man I had loved, the father of my children, reduced to begging the woman he had tried to systematically destroy. But then I thought about the divorce papers I had found, about his plan to paint me as unstable and unfit, about the years I had spent building his success, while he dismissed my contributions as day-to-day management. Ethan, I said quietly, you should have thought about the consequences before you decided I wasn't worth fighting for, instead of fighting against. Sophia, no? You made your choice when you decided to steal from our marriage, lie to the courts, and plan to take my children away. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. I hung up and immediately called Julia to report the contact. He's in full panic mode, she said. That's actually good for us. People in panic make mistakes, and we need him to make one more mistake before this afternoon's hearing. What kind of mistake? The kind where he tries to contact Tessa or move more money or do something else that proves he's still engaged in fraudulent activity. Jordan's monitoring all his communications. If he does anything illegal in the next few hours, it'll just add to our evidence. That afternoon, I sat in Judge Rivera's chambers feeling like I was about to witness the final act of a very long play. The chambers were smaller and more intimate than the main courtroom, with family photos on Judge Rivera's desk and law books lining the walls, a reminder that behind every legal decision were real families whose lives hung in the balance. Ethan had managed to find emergency legal representation, a young attorney named David Kim who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Next to Julia's confident presence and extensive preparation, David seemed overwhelmed and underprepared. Before we begin, Judge Rivera said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen every type of family manipulation imaginable, I want to make something clear. I've been presiding over family court for 15 years, and this case represents one of the most systematic attempts at spousal manipulation I've encountered. She opened a thick folder containing our evidence. Mr. Wallace, I've reviewed the financial records presented by Mrs. Lynn's counsel. These documents show $3.2 million in transfers from marital assets to accounts controlled by your business associate, Miss Lang. Do you have an explanation for these transfers? David Kim leaned forward nervously. Your Honor, my client maintains that all business transactions were legitimate consulting fees for services rendered to Wallace AI. Mr. Kim, Judge Rivera interrupted. I'm asking your client, not you. Mr. Wallace, please explain these transfers. Ethan looked like he had aged 10 years since our separation. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his confident bearing completely absent. Your Honor, Miss Lang has been instrumental in Wallace AI's success. The payments were for strategic consulting, business development, and Mr. Wallace, Judge Rivera's voice carried a warning edge. According to the forensic analysis, Miss Lang received $3.2 million in consulting fees over 8 months, despite having no documented work product, no contracts specifying deliverables, and no business justification for payments of this magnitude. Would you like to revise your answer? Your Honor, business decisions are often complex, and the value of strategic thinking is difficult to quantify. Stop. Judge Rivera's command cut through his rambling. Mr. Wallace, I can tell when someone is lying to me. More importantly, I can recognize fraud when I see it. These transfers weren't business expenses, they were theft. The room fell silent except for the soft sound of David Kim shuffling papers nervously. Miss Mercado, Judge Rivera continued. What is your client seeking? Julia stood with the confidence of someone delivering a carefully prepared knockout blow. Your Honor, Mrs. Lynn seeks full legal and physical custody of the minor children, given Mr. Wallace's pattern of deception, fraud, and criminal activity during these proceedings. Regarding assets, Julia continued, we request that all fraudulent transfers be reversed immediately, that Mr. Wallace be held responsible for any tax consequences of his illegal activity, and that he pay all legal fees associated with uncovering his misconduct. Furthermore, Your Honor, we're requesting criminal referrals to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of corporate fraud, tax evasion, and potential securities violations. Judge Rivera was quiet for a long moment, studying the evidence before her. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone delivering justice that had been a long time coming. Mr. Wallace, your conduct throughout these proceedings has been reprehensible. You've systematically lied to this court, stolen marital assets through fraudulent means, and attempted to manipulate custody proceedings through false allegations about your wife's fitness as a mother. Ethan's face went white as Judge Rivera continued. I'm granting Mrs. Lynn's request for full custody of the minor children. Your visitation will be supervised pending resolution of the criminal charges. I'm referring to the appropriate authorities. Your Honor, David Kim attempted to interrupt. I'm not finished, Counselor. I'm also ordering immediate asset recovery. Mr. Wallace, you have 72 hours to return the $3.2 million you fraudulently transferred to Miss Lang, plus interest, penalties, and Mrs. Lynn's legal fees. Failure to comply will result in contempt, charges, and immediate incarceration. The words hit like physical blows. I watched Ethan's carefully constructed world crumble in real time, his empire of lies collapsing under the weight of documented truth. Finally, Judge Rivera said, I'm ordering a complete forensic audit of Wallace AI by federal authorities. If additional irregularities are discovered involving investor funds or tax obligations, those will be addressed through appropriate criminal proceedings. As we prepared to leave the chambers, Ethan made one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, please, I have daughters who need their father. If I go to prison, if my company is destroyed, they'll lose everything: their college funds, their financial security, their future. Judge Rivera's expression softened slightly, not with sympathy for Ethan, but with concern for Leela and Zoe. Mr. Wallace, your daughters have something more valuable than money. They have a mother who fought to protect them when their father tried to steal their security and stability. They'll be fine. Outside the courthouse, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Justice had been served, but at the cost of the family structure my daughters had known their entire lives. Julia put her arm around my shoulders as we walked down the courthouse steps. How do you feel? Relieved? Vindicated? Terrified about what comes next? What comes next is rebuilding. You have full custody, financial security, and most importantly, you have your integrity intact. That evening, as I sat with Leela and Zoe in our temporary home, they asked the questions I'd been dreading. Is Daddy going to jail? Leela asked with the directness of a 13-year-old who deserved honest answers. He might, I said carefully. He made some very bad choices, and sometimes bad choices have serious consequences. Did he really steal money? Zoe's voice was small, confused. Yes, sweetheart. He took money that belonged to our family and gave it to someone else without telling me. That's not allowed, even for grown-ups. Are we going to be okay? Leela's question carried the weight of a child who had watched her world change dramatically. I pulled both girls close to me on the couch, Justice the dog settling at our feet with the contentment of an animal who knew his family was safe. We're going to be better than okay, I said, meaning it completely. We're going to be strong and honest and proud of who we are. And we're going to help other people who need protecting. How? Zoe asked. I'm going to use everything I learned fighting for you to help other mothers who are facing similar battles. Because the most important thing I discovered through all of this is that being underestimated can be a superpower if you're smart enough to use it strategically. That night, after the girls were asleep, I sat in the kitchen with my mother, drinking tea and processing the day's events. Your father would be proud, she said quietly, even though I destroyed their father's life. You didn't destroy anything, Sophia. You exposed what was already broken. She reached across the table and took my hand. That man destroyed himself the moment he decided you were disposable. You just made sure he couldn't take you and the girls down with him. My phone buzzed with a message from Jordan. Ethan just attempted to contact Tessa. She's not answering. According to my sources, she's already left Boston. Looks like rats abandoning a sinking ship. I smiled grimly. Tessa's strategic mind had calculated the odds and decided that loyalty to Ethan wasn't worth potential criminal charges. She was probably halfway to a non-extradition country by now. Another message arrived. This one from Julia. Federal prosecutors want to meet tomorrow. They're very interested in our evidence. Also, 3 different women's advocacy groups have called asking if you'd be willing to speak about your experience. I stared at that message for a long moment. 6 months ago, I had been hiding in Ethan's shadow, accepting diminishment as the price of marital peace. Now, people wanted to hear My story as an example of strategic resistance and maternal protection. Mom, I said, looking up from my phone, I think I'm about to become someone I never expected to be. Who's that? Someone who fights back. Someone who uses her intelligence as a weapon. Someone who protects not just her own children, but other people's children too. My mother smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had always known her daughter was capable of greatness. Sophia, she said, you've always been that person. You just needed the right circumstances to let her emerge. As I prepared for bed, in our temporary home, I realized that tomorrow would bring new challenges: federal investigations, media attention, and the complex process of rebuilding our lives. But tonight, for the first time in months, I went to sleep knowing that my daughters were safe, that justice had been served, and that I had discovered exactly how formidable I could be when protecting what mattered most. The war was over. Now came the more important work of building something better from the wreckage. 6 weeks later, I stood before the mirror in our temporary bedroom, adjusting the navy blue suit I'd chosen for what Julia called the performance of my lifetime. Today was the final hearing in our divorce proceedings, the day when months of strategic planning, evidence gathering, and legal maneuvering would culminate in a judgment that would determine not just the division of assets, but the entire trajectory of my daughter's futures. You look powerful, my mother said from the doorway, her voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who had watched her daughter transform from victim to victor. I feel terrified, I admitted, smoothing my jacket one final time. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Your father used to say that the most dangerous opponents are those who are afraid of losing what matters most. Through the window, I could see the morning rush hour traffic building toward downtown Boston. Somewhere in that maze of cars and buses, Ethan was probably making the same journey, preparing for what he surely knew would be his final stand. According to Jordan's intelligence, he'd hired his fourth attorney into months, a criminal defense specialist named Robert Chen, who had a reputation for plea bargain negotiations. The girls are having breakfast, my mother continued. They wanted to wish you luck before school. I found Leela and Zoe in the kitchen, both dressed in their Brookline Academy uniforms, both trying to appear normal despite the weight of what today meant for our family. Justice sat between them, his golden fur catching the morning sunlight as if he understood the significance of the moment. Today's the big day, right, Mom? Zoe asked, her 9-year-old directness cutting through any pretense. Yes, sweetheart. Today we find out how our new life is going to look. Leela, now 13 and increasingly perceptive about adult complexities, studied my face with concern. Are you nervous? I could have given her a platitude about everything being fine, but my daughters deserved honesty, especially after everything they'd witnessed over the past months. I'm nervous, I said, sitting down beside them, but I'm also confident. We have the truth on our side, and that's more powerful than any lie. Will we get to keep living here? Zoe gestured around the Cambridge townhouse that had become home. Over the past 2 months, probably not permanently, but wherever we end up living, we'll be together. That's what matters most. Leela reached over and squeezed my hand. Mom, whatever happens today, I want you to know that Zoe and I are proud of you. You fought for us when Daddy tried to. When he tried to say you weren't a good mother, you proved he was wrong. The simple statement nearly undid my careful composure. These girls, my girls, had watched their mother evolve from someone who accepted diminishment to someone who fought back strategically and effectively. They would grow up knowing that women could be formidable protectors, that intelligence was a weapon, that strategic thinking could triumph over manipulation. Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything to me. An hour later, I stood outside Suffolk County Family Court with Julia, watching as media vans set up their equipment along the courthouse steps. Our case had become something larger than a personal divorce. It was being covered as a story about financial fraud, corporate corruption, and what happened when underestimated women fought back. Ready for this? Julia asked, adjusting her own suit jacket with the precision of someone preparing for battle. As ready as I'll ever be. Remember, today isn't just about winning, it's about sending a message. Every woman watching this coverage, every mother facing similar battles, every wife who's been told she's financially dependent and emotionally unstable, they're all counting on us to prove that strategic thinking beats manipulation every time. Inside the courthouse, the scene was unlike anything I'd experienced in our previous hearings. The gallery was packed with journalists, women's rights advocates, legal professionals, and what appeared to be several wives of other tech executives, women who saw their own potential futures reflected in my fight. Judge Eleanor Rivera took her seat with the bearing of someone about to deliver justice. That had been months in the making. At 62, she commanded the courtroom with quiet authority, her silver hair pulled back severely and her dark eyes missing nothing. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying easily through the packed courtroom. "We're here today for final disposition in the matter of Lynn versus Wallace. This case has raised significant issues not just of family law, but of corporate fraud, criminal misconduct, and the weaponization of legal proceedings against vulnerable family members." Across the courtroom, Ethan sat with his new legal team, looking like a shadow of the confident CEO who had once dominated Boston's tech scene. The federal investigations had begun, several of Wallace AI's board members had resigned, and the company's valuation had plummeted as investors fled the scandal. His carefully constructed empire was crumbling in real time. "Before we address the specifics of asset division and custody arrangements," Judge Rivera continued, "I want to review the evidence that has emerged during these proceedings." She opened a thick folder that contained months of documentation: Jordan's surveillance photographs, financial records showing the fraudulent transfers, communications between Ethan and Tessa revealing their systematic deception, and most damning of all, evidence of the manufactured incidents they had planned to create. "Mr. Wallace," Judge Rivera's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen every type of family manipulation, "your conduct throughout these proceedings represents one of the most systematic attempts at spousal destruction I've encountered. In 15 years on this bench." Ethan's attorney, Robert Chen, started to rise, but Judge Rivera continued without pause. "You hired private investigators to surveil your own family. You leaked confidential medical information to the press. You systematically transferred $3.2 million in marital assets to fund an extramarital affair. You attempted to manipulate custody proceedings through false allegations about your wife's mental stability, and perhaps most seriously, you planned to manufacture evidence of maternal unfitness." The courtroom was silent except for the soft scratching of reporters' pens, capturing every word. "Mrs. Lynn," Judge Rivera turned her attention to me. "Would you please stand?" I rose on unsteady legs, my heart pounding with anticipation and terror. "Mrs. Lynn, you have demonstrated remarkable courage, intelligence, and strategic thinking throughout these proceedings. When faced with systematic manipulation and fraud, you chose to gather evidence rather than react emotionally. You built a comprehensive case that exposed not just marital misconduct, but criminal activity that threatens the integrity of our legal system." She paused, allowing her words to settle over the courtroom. "Most importantly, you have shown that being underestimated can be the ultimate strategic advantage if one has the intelligence and determination to use it effectively." Judge Rivera picked up a document from her desk. "Regarding custody of the minor children, Leela and Zoe Wallace, I am granting Mrs. Lynn full legal and physical custody." The words hit me like a physical blow of relief. My daughters would stay with me. They would grow up in a home where their mother's intelligence was valued, where strategic thinking was rewarded, where they would learn that women could be formidable protectors. "Mr. Wallace," Judge Rivera continued, "your visitation rights will be supervised pending resolution of federal criminal charges against you. Given your documented pattern of manipulation and fraud, this court cannot trust your judgment regarding the children's welfare." I watched Ethan's face crumble as the reality hit him. He had gambled everything: his marriage, his relationship with his daughters, his business empire on a strategy designed to destroy me. Instead, he had destroyed himself. Regarding the division of marital assets, Judge Rivera's voice carried the satisfaction of someone delivering perfectly calibrated justice. This court finds that Mr. Wallace's fraudulent conduct warrants deviation from Massachusetts's standard of equitable distribution. She consulted her notes. "Mrs. Lynn will receive 75% of all marital assets, including the family residence, investment portfolios, retirement accounts, and any business interests in Wallace AI, 75%. In a state where the norm was 50-50. Division, Judge Rivera was sending a clear message about the consequences of fraud during divorce proceedings. Furthermore, she continued, "Mr. Wallace will pay child support in the amount of $8,000 per month and spousal support of $15,000 per month for a period of 10 years, amounts calculated based on his historical earning capacity rather than his current reduced circumstances." The financial awards were staggering, more than enough to ensure that the girls and I could maintain our lifestyle while I rebuilt my career on my own terms. Mr. Wallace is also responsible for all legal fees incurred by Mrs. Lynn in uncovering his fraudulent conduct, estimated at $180,000 to date, but Judge Rivera wasn't finished. Finally, I am making formal criminal referrals to the U.S. Attorney's Office regarding Mr. Wallace's systematic fraud, tax evasion, and potential securities violations. The evidence presented in these proceedings suggests criminal conduct that extends far beyond family law. The gavel came down with the finality of justice delivered. Around me, the courtroom erupted in applause, something I'd never seen in a legal proceeding. Women's advocates stood and cheered. Journalists scribbled frantically. Legal professionals nodded with approval at Judge Rivera's comprehensive judgment, but the most meaningful reaction came from the gallery's front row, where I spotted several women I recognized from tech industry events, wives who had watched my battle with intense interest, understanding that my victory created a precedent for their own potential fights. As we prepared to leave the courtroom, Ethan made one final, desperate attempt to reach me. "Sophia," he called out, his voice breaking. "Please, for the girls, can't we find some way to?" I turned to face him one last time. This man who had once been my husband, the father of my children, now reduced to pleading for mercy from the woman he had tried to systematically destroy. "Ethan," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent courtroom, "you had every opportunity to fight for our marriage, to value my contributions, to treat me as an equal partner. Instead, you chose to fight against me. These are the consequences of that choice." "I loved you," he said, and for the first time in months, his voice sounded genuine rather than manipulative. "No," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotion churning in my chest. "You loved the idea of me. You loved having someone to manage your life, while you took credit for our success. You loved having a wife who made you look good at industry events. But you never loved me enough to see me as your equal." As I walked away from the courthouse with Julia, Jordan, and my mother, I felt a mixture of vindication, sadness, and something I hadn't experienced in years: complete freedom. Not just from Ethan's manipulation and control, but from the smaller version of myself I had become during our marriage. Outside the courthouse, we were surrounded by reporters wanting statements, advocates seeking interviews, and legal professionals offering congratulations. Julia handled most of the media attention, but several journalists specifically requested to speak with me. Mrs. Lynn called Rebecca Martinez from NPR, the same reporter who had interviewed me months earlier when this battle began. "What message do you want other women to take from your experience?" I thought about the question carefully, aware that my words would be heard by women across the country who might be facing similar battles. "I want women to know that being underestimated can be your greatest advantage," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the cool autumn air. "While people are dismissing your capabilities, you can be gathering intelligence, building alliances, and preparing for battle. Most importantly, I want women to understand that fighting for yourself and your children isn't selfish, it's necessary." "What's next for you?" asked another reporter. "I'm going to use everything I've learned to help other women who find themselves in similar situations. Knowledge is power, strategy beats emotion, and the most dangerous opponents are those protecting what they love most. Do you have any message for your former husband?" The question came from a journalist I didn't recognize. I considered deflecting, giving a diplomatic non-answer that would close this chapter gracefully. Instead, I chose truth. "I hope he learns from this experience. I hope he understands that trying to destroy someone through manipulation and fraud ultimately destroys the perpetrator. And I hope that someday, our daughters will be able to have a relationship with their father, a man who has learned to value women as equals rather than seeing them as obstacles to be eliminated." Later that afternoon, I sat in Julia's office, signing the final documents that would officially end my marriage and begin my new life as a single mother with full custody of my daughters. "How do you feel?" Julia asked as I finished the last signature. "Exhausted, relieved, terrified about what comes next." I paused, considering the question more deeply, but also proud. 6 months ago, I was living a lie, accepting diminishment as the price of marital peace. Today, I proved that strategic thinking can triumph over manipulation. "What you proved," Julia said, "is that truth has power. When you stopped hiding, stopped making yourself smaller, stopped accepting someone else's definition of your worth. You became formidable. Julia, I said, I want to ask you something. Throughout this entire process, you've been more than my attorney. You've been my mentor, my strategist, my advocate. Why did you take this case so personally? Julia was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at Boston Harbor. Because, she said finally, 20 years ago, I was married to a man who systematically undermined my confidence, dismissed my professional achievements, and tried to convince me that I was lucky he tolerated my difficult personality. When I finally left him, he tried to destroy me professionally, claiming I was unstable and unfit to practice law. What happened? I fought back, but I fought alone, without the kind of strategic support we gave you. It took years to rebuild my reputation and career. She turned back to me. When I saw what Ethan was planning to do to you, I recognized the pattern. But this time, I had the resources and experience to help someone fight back more effectively. So, this was personal for you too. Every case like this is personal for me. Every woman who fights back against systematic manipulation, every mother who refuses to let someone steal her children through false allegations, every wife who discovers her own strength, they're all fighting the same battle I fought. That evening, I returned to the Cambridge townhouse to find Leela and Zoe waiting with my mother, having prepared what they called a victory dinner: homemade pizza, chocolate cake, and sparkling cider in champagne glasses. Did we win, Mom? Zoe asked as I walked through the door. We won, I confirmed, and suddenly found myself crying tears of relief, vindication, and overwhelming gratitude for these two remarkable girls who had watched their mother fight for them and emerge victorious. Does this mean we get to stay together? Leela asked, her 13-year-old sophistication temporarily giving way to the vulnerability of a child who had watched her world change dramatically. Yes, sweetheart, we get to stay together, forever. Over dinner, I explained what Judge Rivera's ruling meant in terms they could understand: that we would have financial security, that their father would still be part of their lives but in a limited way, and most importantly, that we had proven that truth was more powerful than lies. Mom, Leela said as we cleaned up the dinner dishes, I want you to know something. Even if we had lost today, even if everything had gone wrong, Zoe and I would still be proud of you. Why's that, sweetheart? Because you taught us that fighting for what's right is more important than winning. You taught us that being smart is better than being loud. And you taught us that mothers will do anything to protect their children. That night, after the girls were asleep, I sat in the small garden behind the townhouse with my mother, sharing tea and processing the day's events. Your father would have loved today, she said quietly. He would have hated that it was necessary, perhaps. But he would have been proud of how you handled it. You didn't just win a legal case, Sophia. You reclaimed your power. I never realized I had given it away until I started fighting to get it back. That's the insidious nature of emotional manipulation. It happens so gradually that you don't notice you're disappearing until someone tries to erase you completely. My phone buzzed with messages from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who had been following the case. But one message stood out from Patricia Chen, the venture capitalist I had met at the Wallace AI Gala months earlier. Sophia, it read, I followed your case with great interest. Your strategic thinking and courage have been remarkable to witness. I'm starting a new initiative supporting women entrepreneurs and would love to discuss your involvement. Perhaps lunch next week? I showed the message to my mother, who smiled with satisfaction. The business world is taking notice, she said. You've proven that you're not just a victim who fought back, you're a strategist with valuable skills. I'm not sure I'm ready to think about career plans yet. You don't have to be. But opportunities will come, and when they do, you'll be ready. The woman who orchestrated this victory can handle anything the business world might offer. Another message arrived. This one from Jordan. Ethan just attempted to contact Tessa again. Still no response. According to my sources, she's in London, working for a fintech startup. Apparently, she's telling people she's never heard of Wallace AI. I wasn't surprised. Tessa's strategic mind had calculated the odds and determined that loyalty to Ethan wasn't worth potential criminal charges or professional destruction. She had moved on to her next opportunity, leaving Ethan to face the consequences alone. A final message came from Julia. Federal prosecutors want to meet Monday. They're very interested in our evidence for their criminal case. Also, Harvard Law Review wants to interview you about strategic divorce litigation. You're becoming a case study. I stared at that message for a long moment. 6 months ago, I had been hiding in Ethan's shadow, accepting the role of supportive wife while my own capabilities withered from disuse. Now, legal professionals wanted to study my strategic approach as an example of effective advocacy. Mom, I said, looking up from my phone, I think my old life is officially over. Good, she said with fierce satisfaction. That life was too small for who you really are. What if I don't know how to be this new person? What if I can't handle being someone other people look to for strength and strategy? My mother reached over and took my hand, her grip still strong despite her 68 years. Sophia, you've always been this person. You managed Ethan's finances while he took credit. You raised 2 remarkable daughters while he focused on his career. You built an investment portfolio worth millions while he bragged about his business acumen. The only thing that's changed is that now everyone else can see what I've always known. You're formidable. As I prepared for bed and what would likely be one of our last nights in the Cambridge townhouse, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The discovery of those divorce papers had felt like the end of my world. Instead, it had been the beginning of something I never could have imagined, a complete transformation from victim to victor, from hidden supporter to public advocate. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: federal investigations, media attention, decisions about where to live and how to rebuild our lives. But tonight, I went to sleep knowing that my daughters were safe, that justice had been served, and that I had discovered exactly how powerful I could be when protecting what mattered most. More importantly, I had proven something that would echo far beyond our personal story: that underestimated women are the most dangerous opponents of all, especially when they stop hiding their intelligence and start using it strategically. The war was over. Now came the more important work of building something better, stronger, and more authentic from the victory we had earned. 18 months later, morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our new home in Beacon Hill, casting golden light across the hardwood floors that Leela and Zoe had helped me choose. Our golden retriever, Justice, yes, we'd kept that name despite the girl's occasional eye-rolling, stretched lazily in a patch of sunlight, his tail thumping against the antique Persian rug I'd purchased without asking anyone's permission. I stood in my home office, reviewing the quarterly report for the Sophia Lynn Foundation for Women's Legal Empowerment, the nonprofit I had established 8 months after our divorce was finalized. The numbers were staggering in the best possible way. We had helped 127 women navigate complex divorce proceedings, provided legal resources to victims of financial abuse, and most importantly, created a network of support that ensured no woman had to fight these battles alone. Mom? Zoe's voice carried from the kitchen, where she was undoubtedly attempting to make breakfast, despite my repeated warnings about her ambitious culinary experiments. Jordan's here, and he brought bagels. Jordan Ackerman had become more than our former private investigator. He was now the Foundation's Director of Investigative Services and one of our family's closest friends. His background in criminal investigation and his growing network of contacts had proven invaluable in cases involving hidden assets, domestic surveillance, and the kind of sophisticated manipulation that wealthy, powerful men often employed against their wives. "Morning, boss," he said, as I entered the kitchen, using the title that still made me smile despite hearing it daily. The transition from desperate divorce client to nonprofit executive had been surreal, but watching women discover their own strength through our programs made every challenging moment worthwhile. "What crisis are we solving today?" I asked, accepting the coffee he'd brought from the bakery down the street, another small luxury that represented my newfound ability to spend money on things that brought me joy. 3 new cases came in overnight, Jordan said, settling into one of the kitchen chairs that had become his unofficial office space during our weekly strategy meetings. 2 involving hidden cryptocurrency assets. Apparently that's becoming the new offshore banking for tech executives trying to hide money from their wives. Of course it is, I said, shaking my head. What's the 3rd case? Jordan's expression darkened. A venture capitalist in Cambridge who's been systematically undermining his wife's confidence while transferring assets to shell companies. Sound familiar? Too familiar. Despite the public attention our case had received, despite the criminal charges against Ethan and the professional destruction that had followed, powerful men continued to employ the same strategies against their wives. The difference now was that women had resources, legal precedents, and most importantly, a playbook for fighting back strategically. What's our capacity looking like? I asked, though I already knew the answer would require difficult decisions about which cases to prioritize. Julia thinks we can take on 2 of them immediately, but the third will require bringing in additional counsel. The good news is that Patricia Chen's foundation offered to co-fund any case involving tech industry executives. Patricia Chen had become an unexpected ally and friend, the venture capitalist who had offered me professional opportunities. After our victory had evolved into a powerful advocate for women facing similar battles. Her financial support and business connections had been instrumental in expanding our foundation's reach and impact. Speaking of Julia, Jordan continued, she wanted me to remind you about tonight. Tonight, Harvard Law School was hosting a symposium on strategic litigation in high-asset divorce cases, and I was the keynote speaker. The irony wasn't lost on me 18 months ago. Ethan had tried to paint me as an intellectually dependent housewife. Now Harvard was inviting me to lecture law students about strategic thinking and legal advocacy. Everything ready for the presentation? Jordan asked. As ready as it can be. Though I still can't quite believe they want to hear from someone whose legal education consisted of paralegal training and on-the-job strategic thinking. Sophia, Jordan's voice carried the gentle firmness of someone who had watched my transformation firsthand. You revolutionized how family courts handle financial fraud in divorce proceedings. Your case created legal precedents that are being cited in courtrooms across the country. You're not just qualified to speak, you're the expert they need to hear from. The truth was that our victory had rippled far beyond our personal story. The comprehensive evidence we'd gathered, the strategic approach we'd employed, and most importantly, the criminal referrals that had resulted from Ethan's fraud had changed how attorneys approached high-asset divorce cases. Law schools were teaching our case as an example of effective advocacy, and women's advocacy groups were using our story as a template for strategic resistance. Is everything arranged for tonight? I asked. Julia's handling logistics. Your mother's picking up the girls from school, and yes, your presentation slides are loaded on your laptop exactly where you left them. My mother had moved back to New York after the divorce was finalized, but she visited frequently and remained one of my strongest supporters. At 70, she was busier than ever, having started her own consulting business helping immigrant women navigate professional challenges. Watching her daughter fight back had apparently inspired her to channel her own experiences into advocacy work. That afternoon, as I reviewed my presentation notes in preparation for the evening's event, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. The woman who had found those divorce papers in Ethan's briefcase had been living a smaller life than she was capable of, accepting diminishment as the price of marital peace, hiding her intelligence to make someone else feel superior. The woman sitting in this Beacon Hill office was done hiding, done apologizing for her capabilities, done making herself smaller for anyone's comfort. I was running a foundation that had helped over 100 women, speaking at universities and conferences, consulting with law firms across the country, and most importantly, raising daughters who understood that women could be formidable protectors and strategic thinkers. My phone buzzed with a text from Leela, now 14 and increasingly sophisticated in her understanding of both legal strategy and social justice. Good luck tonight, Mom. Zoe and I will be watching the live stream from Grandma's apartment. We're proud of you. Another message followed. From Zoe, 11 and still delightfully direct. Make sure you tell them about how you used Daddy's own arrogance against him. That was the best part. I smiled at my younger daughter's strategic appreciation. Both girls had processed our family's transformation in their own ways, but they shared a common understanding that their mother had fought for them and won. They would grow up knowing that women could be fierce advocates, that intelligence was a weapon, that strategic thinking could triumph over manipulation. The Harvard Law School Symposium was held in Langdell Library's reading room, a space that embodied everything I had once believed was beyond my reach. The room was packed with law students, practicing attorneys, family court judges, and women's advocacy professionals, people who had come to hear about strategic divorce litigation from someone who had lived it rather than simply studied it. Professor Elizabeth Warren, who was moderating the panel, introduced me with words that still felt surreal to hear applied to my experience. Our keynote speaker tonight transformed what many considered a personal legal battle into a case study in strategic advocacy that has influenced family law practice nationwide. Professor Warren began. Sophia Lynn's approach to evidence gathering Strategic communication and legal documentation has created new standards for protecting women and children in high-conflict divorce proceedings. As I took the podium, looking out at an audience of legal professionals who were there to learn from my experience, I felt the full weight of how far I had traveled from the woman who had once hidden her capabilities to maintain marital peace. 18 months ago, I found unsigned divorce papers in my husband's briefcase that accused me of mental instability, financial dependence, and unfitness as a mother. Those accusations were wrong on every count, but they taught me something important about how powerful men view the women in their lives. I paused, scanning the audience of future lawyers who would someday represent women facing similar battles. They taught me that being underestimated is only a disadvantage if you accept other people's assessment of your capabilities. When someone dismisses your intelligence, they stop monitoring your strategic thinking. When they assume you're financially dependent, they become careless about hiding assets. When they believe you're emotionally unstable, they underestimate your capacity for patient, methodical planning. I continued for the next 45 minutes, walking the audience through our strategic approach, how we had gathered evidence, systematically built a comprehensive legal team, anticipated and countered Ethan's moves, and most importantly, used his own arrogance and assumptions against him. The key insight, I explained, was understanding that this wasn't just a divorce proceeding, it was warfare. And in warfare, the side with better intelligence, superior strategy, and more disciplined execution usually wins, regardless of resource disparities. During the question and answer session that followed, a third-year law student asked the question I'd been expecting. Mrs. Lynn, how do you respond to critics who say your approach was unnecessarily adversarial? Some family law practitioners argue that collaborative divorce methods produce better outcomes for children. It was a fair question, and one that touched on the moral complexity of what we had accomplished. That's an excellent question, I replied. And under normal circumstances, I would agree that collaborative approaches often serve families better. But collaboration requires good faith from both parties. When one spouse is systematically lying, hiding assets, and planning to manufacture evidence of the other's unfitness, collaboration becomes complicity in your own destruction. I looked directly at the student who had asked the question. My daughters needed a mother who could protect them from a father who was willing to steal their security and stability to fund his affair. They needed someone who would fight strategically and effectively when their family was under attack. Sometimes the most collaborative thing you can do is refuse to collaborate with your own diminishment. The audience responded with sustained applause, but the question that followed challenged me even more deeply. How do you handle the guilt about essentially destroying your children's father? Asked a family court judge I recognized from Boston.it was the question that haunted me most, the moral complexity that kept me awake some nights despite our victory. Judge Morrison, that's the hardest part of everything we accomplished, I said honestly. But I didn't destroy Ethan, he destroyed himself through his choices. I simply documented those choices and presented them to the court. I paused, choosing my words carefully. My daughters now understand that actions have consequences, that lying and stealing lead to loss of trust and privilege, and that people who manipulate systems often get caught. Those are valuable lessons even when learning them is painful. More importantly, I continued, they learned that their mother was capable of protecting them when they were threatened. They saw strategic thinking triumph over manipulation. They watched truth prevail over lies. As difficult as it was to watch their father's world collapse, it was more important for them to see their mother fight effectively for their future. After the symposium, I was surrounded by law students wanting advice, practicing attorneys seeking consultation on similar cases, and women's advocates interested in partnership opportunities. But the conversation that mattered most came from a young woman who approached me as the crowd was dispersing. Mrs. Lynn, she said quietly, I'm a first-year law student, but I'm also a single mother who left an abusive marriage last year. I wanted to thank you for showing that women like us can fight back and win. What's your story? I asked, recognizing something in her determination that reminded me of my own journey. My ex-husband was a corporate attorney who used his legal knowledge to intimidate me. During our divorce, he tried to claim I was mentally unstable because I had sought therapy after he broke my wrist during an argument. He hid assets and tried to get custody of our son by claiming I was an unfit mother. What happened? I documented everything, just like you did. I gathered evidence of his violence, his asset hiding, his attempts to manipulate the legal system. I represented myself because I couldn't afford an attorney, but I used your case as a template. She smiled with quiet satisfaction. I won custody and enough support to pay for law school. My son and I are safe, and in 3 years, I'll be an attorney who specializes in helping other women fight back. Driving home that night through the quiet streets of Boston, I reflected on the conversation with the law student. Our victory had created something larger than personal justice. It had provided a roadmap for other women facing similar battles, a demonstration that strategic thinking could triumph over resource advantages and legal manipulation. My phone rang as I pulled into our driveway. Julia, how did the presentation go? She asked. Better than I expected. I think we're reaching the right people, future lawyers who will represent women like us, judges who will recognize manipulation tactics, advocates who understand the importance of strategic documentation. Sophia, there's something I want to discuss with you. I've been offered a position with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, heading up a new domestic violence prosecution unit. Julia, that's incredible. You'd be perfect for that role. I'd like you to consider coming with me as a special consultant. Your expertise in financial fraud within domestic relationships, your understanding of manipulation tactics, your ability to help victims think strategically. The AG's office needs someone with your perspective. I was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. Working with the state's top law enforcement officials would give us resources and authority we'd never had as a private foundation. What would that mean for the foundation? I asked. We could expand it, make it a state-supported resource center. We could help women not just in Massachusetts, but create a model that other states could replicate. As I entered our house, I found Leela and Zoe waiting in the living room, having insisted on staying up despite the late hour to hear about the Harvard presentation. How did it go, Mom? Leela asked, her 14-year-old sophistication temporarily giving way to excitement about her mother's growing public profile. It went well, sweetheart. A lot of people are interested in learning from our experience so they can help other families. Did you tell them about the part where Daddy thought he was so smart, but you were actually 10 steps ahead of him? The whole time? Zoe asked with the directness that made her such an effective strategy critic. I told them about the importance of patient planning and careful documentation, I said diplomatically. That's the same thing, Zoe pointed out with a grin. Later that evening, after the girls were in bed, I sat in my home office reviewing the quarterly foundation reports and considering Julia's proposal. Our success metrics were impressive: 1 to 7. Women helped, $14 million in assets recovered from hiding spouses, 43 cases of documented fraud referred for criminal prosecution, and most importantly, 0 women who had worked with us had lost custody due to false allegations of unfitness. But the statistics that mattered most were more personal. Leela was thriving in high school, involved in the debate team and student government, already talking about law school and social justice careers. Zoe was excelling academically while developing a fierce sense of fairness that she applied to everything from playground disputes to national politics. They were growing up with a completely different understanding of female power than I had possessed at their age. They knew that women could be strategic thinkers, effective advocates, and formidable protectors. They understood that being underestimated could be an advantage if you were smart enough to use it strategically. My phone buzzed with a message from Jordan. Interesting development. Ethan's parole hearing is scheduled for next month. Federal prosecutors say he'll likely be released with time served plus community service. I stared at that message for a long moment. Ethan had ultimately served 14 months in federal prison for fraud and tax evasion. Wallace AI had been dissolved, its assets sold to cover investor losses and legal settlements. He had lost everything: his company, his reputation, his relationship with Tessa, and most painfully, his daughter's respect. Another message followed. His attorney reached out through channels. He wants to know if you'd be open to family therapy sessions to work toward rebuilding his relationship with the girls. The question of whether to facilitate some form of reconciliation between Ethan and our daughters was one I'd been avoiding. They deserved to have a relationship with their father, but only if he had genuinely learned from his mistakes and could interact with them without manipulation or attempts to undermine my authority. I forwarded Jordan's message to Julia with a note. What do you think? Is this genuine rehabilitation or another manipulation strategy? Her response came within minutes. Let me have Jordan investigate his activities in prison and his current living situation. If he's genuinely changed, we can consider supervised reintroduction. If this is another attempt to manipulate the situation, we shut it down immediately. The next morning brought a different kind of challenge. I woke to find Leela at the kitchen table, reading something on her laptop with the intense concentration she usually reserved for debate team research. "What are you working on so early, sweetheart?" I asked, starting the coffee maker that had become essential to my morning routine. "I'm researching domestic violence statistics for a presentation I'm giving to the freshman health class," she said without looking up from her screen. "Did you know that financial abuse occurs in 78% of abusive relationships?" I didn't know the exact statistic, but that sounds consistent with what we see at the foundation. Leela looked up from her laptop with the serious expression she wore when processing complex social issues. "Mom, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. When you were married to Daddy, did you know you were being manipulated? Or did it happen so gradually that you didn't realize it until you found those papers?" It was a sophisticated question from a 14-year-old, but one that deserved an honest answer. "It happened gradually," I said, sitting down across from her. "Your father never said I'm going to systematically undermine your confidence and dismiss your intelligence. Instead, he would make small comments about my decisions, suggest that I might be overthinking things, or praise me for being supportive. When I deferred to his judgment, so you didn't recognize it as manipulation?" Fraud referred for criminal prosecution, and most importantly, 0 women who had worked with us had lost custody due to false allegations of unfitness. But the statistics that mattered most were more personal. Leela was thriving in high school, involved in the debate team and student government, already talking about law school and social justice careers. Zoe was excelling academically while developing a fierce sense of fairness that she applied to everything from playground disputes to national politics. They were growing up with a completely different understanding of female power than I had possessed at their age. They knew that women could be strategic thinkers, effective advocates, and formidable protectors. They understood that being underestimated could be an advantage if you were smart enough to use it strategically. My phone buzzed with a message from Jordan. "Interesting development. Ethan's parole hearing is scheduled for next month. Federal prosecutors say he'll likely be released with time served plus community service." I stared at that message for a long moment. Ethan had ultimately served 14 months in federal prison for fraud and tax evasion. Wallace AI had been dissolved, its assets sold to cover investor losses and legal settlements. He had lost everything: his company, his reputation, his relationship with Tessa, and most painfully, his daughter's respect. Another message followed. His attorney reached out through channels. "He wants to know if you'd be open to family therapy sessions to work toward rebuilding his relationship with the girls." The question of whether to facilitate some form of reconciliation between Ethan and our daughters was one I'd been avoiding. They deserved to have a relationship with their father, but only if he had genuinely learned from his mistakes and could interact with them without manipulation or attempts to undermine my authority. I forwarded Jordan's message to Julia with a note. "What do you think? Is this genuine rehabilitation or another manipulation strategy?" Her response came within minutes. "Let me have Jordan investigate his activities in prison and his current living situation. If he's genuinely changed, we can consider supervised reintroduction. If this is another attempt to manipulate the situation, we shut it down immediately." The next morning brought a different kind of challenge. I woke to find Leela at the kitchen table, reading something on her laptop with the intense concentration she usually reserved for debate team research. "What are you working on so early, sweetheart?" I asked, starting the coffee maker that had become essential to my morning routine. "I'm researching domestic violence statistics for a presentation I'm giving to the freshman health class," she said without looking up from her screen. "Did you know that financial abuse occurs in 78% of abusive relationships?" I didn't know the exact statistic, but that sounds consistent with what we see at the foundation. Leela looked up from her laptop with the serious expression she wore when processing complex social issues. "Mom, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. When you were married to Daddy, did you know you were being manipulated? Or did it happen so gradually that you didn't realize it until you found those not at first, but looking back, I can see the pattern. Every time I expressed an opinion that differed from his, he would find a way to make me doubt myself. Every time I suggested a financial strategy, he would implement it but take credit for the idea. Every time I tried to assert myself professionally, he would remind me how much the family needed me to focus on domestic responsibilities. Leela was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the analytical mind that reminded me so much of my own younger self. That's why you fight so hard for the women who come to the foundation, she said. It wasn't a question. Partly, yes. But mostly I fight for them because I want other daughters to grow up knowing that their mothers are strong, intelligent, and capable of protecting them from anything. Is that why you're considering the job with the Attorney General's office? I looked at my daughter in surprise. How did you know about that? I heard you talking to Julia last night. The door was open, and you weren't exactly whispering. What do you think about it? Leela considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all important decisions. I think you should do it. You've proven that you can help individual women fight back. Now you have a chance to change the system so fewer women need to fight these battles alone. That afternoon, I called Julia to accept the position with the Attorney General's office. The opportunity to work within the state's legal system, to help create policies and procedures that would protect vulnerable women and children, felt like the natural evolution of everything we had accomplished. I accept, I told her, but I have conditions. Name them. The foundation continues operating as an independent organization. Jordan stays with us as Director of Investigative Services. And any woman who works with our program gets referred to the best possible legal representation, not whoever happens to be available. Done, Julia said immediately. Sophia, this is going to change how Massachusetts handles domestic abuse cases. Your expertise in financial manipulation, your understanding of strategic documentation, your ability to help victims think like prosecutors, this could be the model for how other states approach these cases. That evening, over dinner with the girls and Justice sprawled under the table hoping for dropped food, I shared the news about my new position. So you'll be working for the state government? Zoe asked, clearly trying to understand the scope of the change. I'll be consulting with prosecutors who handle cases involving domestic violence and financial abuse, helping them understand the tactics that manipulative people use and how to gather evidence that will hold up in court. Will you still help individual women through the foundation? Leela asked. Yes, but we'll also be able to help women through the legal system itself. Instead of just giving them tools to fight back, we'll be changing the system so it's better at protecting them. Leela smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had correctly predicted an important decision. This is good, Mom. You're not just helping people survive their battles, you're changing the battlefield itself. Later that night, as I prepared for bed in our beautiful Beacon Hill home, surrounded by books and artwork and the comfortable evidence of a life rebuilt on my own terms, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. Apers? It was a sophisticated question from a 14-year-old, but one that deserved an honest answer. It happened gradually, I said, sitting down across from her. Your father never said I'm going to systematically undermine your confidence and dismiss your intelligence. Instead, he would make small comments about my decisions, suggest that I might be overthinking things, or praise me for being supportive. When I deferred to his judgment, so you didn't recognize it as manipulation? The woman who had found those divorce papers 20 months ago had been living a smaller life than she was capable of, accepting diminishment as the price of peace, hiding her intelligence to make someone else feel superior. She had been a victim of systematic manipulation, convinced that her worth was tied to her usefulness to a man who saw her as disposable. The woman getting ready for bed tonight was done hiding, done apologizing for her capabilities, done making herself smaller for anyone's comfort. I was raising daughters who understood that women could be formidable protectors, running an organization that had helped over 100 women discover their own strength, and about to take a position that would influence how an entire state addressed domestic abuse. My phone buzzed with a final message of the day from a woman named Sarah, whose case we had just accepted, a surgeon's wife whose husband was attempting the same systematic destruction that Ethan had planned for me. Mrs. Lynn, the message read, I met with Julia today and wanted to thank you for everything the foundation is doing. For the first time in years, I feel like I have hope. I feel like maybe I'm not as powerless as he's tried to make me believe. I smiled as I typed my response. Sarah, you were never powerless. You just needed the right tools and the right team. We're going to help you document everything, gather evidence systematically, and show the world exactly how strong you really are. Welcome to the fight.as. I turned off the lights and settled into bed, Justice padding into the room to take his customary position guarding our family. I realized that our story had evolved into something larger than personal victory. We had created a template for strategic resistance, a demonstration that truth could triumph over manipulation, and most importantly, proof that underestimated women are the most dangerous opponents of all. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, cases to review, strategies to develop, women to help discover their own strength. But tonight, I went to sleep knowing that my daughters were safe, that justice had been served, and that I had transformed trauma into purpose, victimhood into advocacy, and personal pain into a force for protecting other families. The war was over, but the more important work of changing systems and empowering women was just beginning. And for the first time since finding those divorce papers in Ethan's briefcase, I knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of accomplishing. I was Sophia Lynn, mother, strategist, advocate, and living proof that the most powerful weapon against manipulation is a woman who refuses to be underestimated. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.